Get started. So like I was saying, you guys, unit one is mostly about the engine. So that would be the pistons, the cylinder, the block, the head gasket, the mechanical part of the engine, the head, the valves, that type of thing. And there's going to be a common theme with what we talk about right now is make sure the engine itself is good before you start trying to do coils and spark plugs and injectors. Because if you go after a car that has a problem and you're like, you need to replace spark plugs and coils, next thing you know, you're $500 in spark plugs and coils. You put that on an engine that's no good. You know, the engine could be $5,000. Some of the engines can be a lot more. Like we were talking over the break about some of these higher end, you know, like if it's a Hellcat or something, those are like $25,000. So you don't put a bunch of parts on an engine that's 25 grand if the customer's not going to replace the engine for 25 grand. Make sense? So want to reel it in here. Just make sure some of the checks that we do might be because we're trying to diagnose the specific issue. And sometimes we make sure that we verify the engine itself is good before we get too deep into some other problems. Okay. Because ultimately we're trying to like be good to the customer, right? So as recently as I looked at a car on Wednesday, and this was a friend. He's an AC guy, so he's got some mechanical ability and he's pretty smart. And his wife's 2016 Ford Explorer has a misfire. All right, so this is where we're going with this. Misfire could be a number of things, but misfires most commonly have more to do with spark plugs or ignition coils. Could it be an injector? Yes. Could it be worn piston rings? Yes. But like for the DIY person, they're more like, oh, I'll put spark plugs and maybe coils. So that's exactly what he did. He did a new spark plugs, and I think he did one coil because it had a misfire on cylinder number 1. You think it fixed it? No, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. So it obviously didn't fix it. Then what he did was he moved the coils around, which is actually a pretty good, it's a good way to tell if the coils are bad. You can actually move it, right? And if you had a bad coil in cylinder 1 and you moved it to 3 and the misfire followed to 3, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's a coil because I moved it, right? So then he started getting into some troubleshooting. And usually that's about the limit of the DIY person. They don't go any further than that. They don't know how to do more advanced testing. Like compression testing is not that complicated, but typically the DIY person isn't going to do a lot of diagnosis. They're going to do some swapping. You know what we call that? Breaking out the parts cannon, blast some spark plugs in there, put some coils in there, see if it fixes it. All right. And actually what he did kind of make sense. You know why? He didn't pay $1 to anybody for diagnosis. It's 10 years old. It's got 100-something thousand on it. It probably does need spark plugs. I don't disagree with any of that. However, it still didn't fix it, so like when the car comes to us, we can't approach it like a DIY person. We can't say, well, it's kind of old, so let's put some spark plugs in there, right? Because very quickly, you got to understand our cost of doing repairs is expensive. So for him, he rolled down to get in the zone, AutoZone. He's like, hey, I need spark plugs. And they're like, oh, they're $15 a piece. And they probably are for Iridium spark plugs, $15 a piece. So he put $60 worth of spark plugs in it. And then he got one coil. And I think he got the coil off Amazon. That could be a whole side discussion. But he put the coil in it. And I think he paid probably like $60 for the coil. So he had $120 into the thing and it didn't fix it. Okay. It's $120. Do you know what $120 will get you if you drop it off at a dealership today's prices? It won't even get you 1 hour diagnosis. All right. So I'm kind of saying like what he did made sense just because he did it himself. But when you bring your car to the shop, to the technician, to the professional, you're not expecting them to guess. like you can guess when it's your car and you're trying to save money because your labor is free to yourself. But when they bring it to us, we can't be doing that. Okay, makes sense. It's a real quick way to get a lawsuit. It's a real quick way to get a bad review. It's a real quick way to get reported to the Bureau of Automotive Repair or some sort of, agency that inspects these types of things. All right. So with that, as we go into this, keep in mind, we are all about really diagnosing the car. And also, I'm going to tell you what the diagnosis was on that. And you're going to see why it's a bad idea to be putting a bunch of spark plugs and stuff in a car and then finding out later it needs the engine redone. All right. So if it needs major engine work and the customer's like, I'm not putting $5,000 into this, why'd you put the $120 worth of parts on a boat anchor then? You don't put $120 on it and then throw the whole thing in the trash. Make sense? So we're mostly trying to get aligned to why we do things the way we do, right? So jump into the subject a little bit more. Obviously, for the engine to run right, to run efficiently, to run correctly, mechanically, it has to be in good working order. So when this customer was like, let me throw the spark plugs and the coil in it, probably what should have happened, let's back it up, let's put in reverse, Terry, and let's say, like, is the engine good? So when he gave it to me and I checked the codes, there's a P0300 multiple or random cylinder misfire and a P0301, that's a cylinder 1 misfire. There was also a 303. And I was kind of like, that's weird. And I did talk with him real quick, like, what'd you do? And he's like, well, I put a coil in 1 and then I moved it to 3. And so, like, he was trying to chase cylinder 1 and 3 because he knew those codes. I'm sort of like, all right, first off, cylinder number 1 is the first thing I'm going to focus on. If cylinder number 1 is not misfiring, it could be the coil and it could be the spark plug and it could be the injector, but it could also be the engine itself. So first thing I did, I checked compression. And in this case, the compression was decent, but it seemed like a little bit low. But when I checked the compression, I also pulled the spark plug out and I noticed it was wet, but not oily wet. It was kind of like orangish, like almost had little shiny deposits on it. And because this is the area that I study, I'm kind of like, that's usually if it's consuming coolant, like if it's burning coolant. So really quickly, I'm like, hey, if this engine's consuming coolant and there's coolant going in the cylinder, hold up, I need to look into that like urgently. Like what I'm not going to do is start selling fuel injector services and, the spark plugs are already new, but like the ignition coil's new, but it's from Amazon. So like, do I know it's bad? Like it could be I could have stopped right there and been like, hey, we need to get a Ford OEM ignition coil. But instead, knowing that I really want to make sure the engine's good and the engine could cause the misfire, and I already saw a red flag with the weird deposits on the spark plug, what I decided to do was the compression test, and that was inconclusive. The next thing I did was I pressure tested the cooling system, and I sent a camera down in the cylinder. You want to know what I saw? Coolant in the cylinder within 30 minutes. And I'm still going to bill this customer an hour diagnosis because I got to put it together, right? But within 30 minutes of actual testing was like, hey, buddy, yeah, like you got coolant in the engine. He's like, well, what's that mean? I'm like, that you wasted your money on spark plugs and coil? He's like, yeah, well, what do I do now? So my answer in this case is, I don't exactly know. Yeah, get a new car is a for real, very possible answer. And I told him, you sure you want to fix this? And he's like, yeah, it's paid off. I want to fix it. And I'm like, all right. So best case, the head gasket's blown. Based on me seeing coolant in the engine, the problem's in the engine. It could be the head gasket. And that's probably what it is. But understand, if a head gasket is blown, there could be a crack in the gasket. That will show up the same as if the block is warped or the head is warped, or if the head is cracked, right? So like, if I'm going to say on the low end, it's a head gasket. I looked up the labor, by the way. It was, I think 17 point something hours. So keep that in mind. And then that'd be the best case, right? A gasket set, which might be $250 and 17 hours of labor, which most people are going to say like, you know, hey, we also got to do this, a few other things, probably be 20. All right. So we're going to say 20 hours of labor, and that's pulled directly from service information, the labor manual, and $250, pause, that's best case. Or if I pull it apart and I measure the head and the head is warped, and now the head needs to either be resurfaced or replaced, or I measure the block and the block is warped or cracked and now it needs a block. So best case is head gasket, 20 hours of labor, and $250 in parts. Worst case is, hey, this engine's like trash. Like we can't even get a head for this, or the block, if it's in the block, honestly, if your block is warped or cracked, like you're not going to do a bare block and change over a bunch of used pistons and rods and stuff. Like you're probably going to get a whole short block bottom end stuff, or you're going to get a whole new engine realistically. And you know, some recent numbers I've got to give some perspective on this. Another friend, it's interesting, when you get skills, you get a lot of friends, right? So like friend, okay, you get what I'm saying? Friend has a Subaru and had a similar thing, a misfire, brought into the dealer, and the dealer's like, hey, you need like a full engine rebuild. And they didn't even say a new engine. They're talking about like rebuilding what they've got. 15 grand. No, they both had like low hundreds, 120,000 or so, 100 lower hundreds. So I'm just giving you real facts. I could probably give VIN numbers. So it's crazy to think this could happen. I've seen it happen on much lower mileage. I've seen it not happen, but it's kind of inconsistent. Like sometimes the engines last 200, 300,000. Sometimes we're running into these problems at like 90,000. You know, so you could look at the mileage and get like a little bit of a prediction, but like in the case of this Subaru, I think the car was pretty new. I think it was only like 4 years old, but she drove it and drove it and drove it. And like the husband called and said, hey, we got this problem with this Subaru, whatever, it's 15 grand to fix it. And it's just crazy because like we just got the car, and I'm like, how old is it? I think they said like 3 or 4 years old. And I'm like, is it under warranty still? And they're like, no, it's out on mileage. It's got just over 100,000. 15 grand was the dealer's estimate. Kind of the cool thing on that one was they started a case with Subaru, and Subaru Concierge or whatever, Subaru Corporate Center was like, you know what? We will pay $5,000 towards your repair. And then I think they kind of negotiated the price with the dealer a little bit. And I think rather than replace some things, they cleaned them up. I think they ended up getting the car fixed for about $7,000 because Subaru paid $5,000, and then they negotiated a little bit. So like for $7,000, they were interested in fixing it. And that kind of made sense because it was only 3 or 4 years old, but still, like, that's a real possibility. On this Ford, first off, Ford is a 4-letter word that starts with F, and I tend to not like those. The letter, the word, and the car brand. All of it's all just bad. However, he likes it though. It's clean. It's all blacked out, black wheels and black tint, and his wife loves it. And so I'm like, you want to fix it? And he's like, yeah, I want to fix it. I was like, so best case, 20 hours, you know, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to price them. Like this just happened a couple of days ago. So I gave him the car back. I'm like, it needs a head gasket at a minimum, but like, let me figure out what my price is going to be to do this job, because I'm not even sure. I also looked it up. There's special tools that I need to have to pull the cam, to pull the crank timing gear. Like, I don't know, it's a mess. But retail on that, if you roll into a shop right now, independent shops over $100 an hour, probably about 125 to 150, sometimes more. A dealership right now is 200 or higher per hour. So if it's going to be dealer work, you're talking $200 an hour times 20 hours, right? Plus parts. So it's thousands either way. So to give you the perspective, like back in the day, people would be like, oh yeah, I can get my small block Chevy out of the junkyard, $300. Like that isn't the case anymore. You're not going to get that. We're not talking about hundreds. If it's the engine, it's thousands instantly, boom. And it might not be like 2 grand. It might be like 9, 12, 15, these types of numbers real quick. So kind of the perspective is, if the problem's in the engine, like in the case of this Explorer, the problem's in the engine, right away we need to stop talking about like, hey, let's do a bunch of maintenance and let's do some coils and let's change some emissions things. Like if the engine's no good, we need to address that immediately, or at least get a price for that immediately and tell the customer, do you want to fix it or not? And they may very well be like, no, I'm out. I'm just gonna cut this car loose, trade it in, try to sell it for parts or whatever. If they're not going to fix it, just make sure you got a good diagnosis of the engine and move on. And I give you example after example after example, because most of the times when I get involved, it's probably because I'm not even trying to get involved. It's probably because other people took a stab at it, or they got a really high price and they're hoping that because they know I'll do work on the side and not charge $200 an hour, maybe I'm their savior for fixing the car that they don't have money to fix, or these types of things. So like I got just example on example. I've even made some quick videos on how I did the diagnosis on some of these cars, but my lesson to you is going to be, if the problem could be the engine, we want to check the engine first. Cool? Fair enough. Then from there, understand that's kind of like ASE A1 material. ASE A1 is engine repair. So if you look, you can see ASE A1 is engine repair. That's kind of a different subject, but the reason I really want to make sure we drive that one is A, we found out most of you haven't taken engine class yet, which is fine. That's good. But B, we still need to get oriented in the right way. Like engine performance tends to more be the spark and the fuel and the emission systems. But if you only focus on that and you forget that there's an engine underneath that needs to be good, you misdiagnose, and you also are just a bad steward of the customer's money. You tell them to fix all this external things, but in reality, maybe the problem is the engine itself. So we're going to do some review of what would normally be ASE A1 stuff. Okay, and then additionally, I told you earlier, there's ASE A6 stuff that goes into engine performance as well, but that's what we'll cover a little bit later, not this one. All right, so it's just extremely critical that we diagnose these right. So let's just say the first one right off the bat. Excessive oil consumption. What does that mean? The engine is, consuming, just consuming. So why is it consuming? Consuming is different than leaking. Okay, so I could even go a step even more basic, is if the engine's leaking all over the place, like, that probably really needs to be addressed as well, but that's not complicated. Like you lift it up and you're like, oh, there's a bunch of oil all over here. That's not really engine performance. That's really, really, really A1, which is engine repair, sealing the engine, that type of work, right? So we won't talk a ton about oil leaks. We will talk about consumption. Those can be harder to diagnose. So if it's not external leaks, let's focus on internal leaks. For example, we were talking about yours, but we'll make it about a different one. Who's driving the Toyota Matrix? Those are nice cars. I like those. Toyota Matrix is that you just can't kill those. They're good. It is, I'm telling you. Well, I mean, it might be older now, but those are good cars. So Toyota Matrix is a perfect example. That had an engine in there called the 1ZZ FE. Really good engine with one flaw. They were notorious for oil consumption. So on those engines, and it was happening a lot on another Type 2, the 2AZ. So older four-cylinder Toyotas, they're well built. They'll keep running and running and running and running, but they have some defects. So like we'll even move slightly more towards the defect on the 2AZ, which was when the piston goes up, oil sloshes on the cylinder wall. Makes sense? When the piston comes down, the piston rings should scrape the oil from the cylinder wall. And it goes in this little landing spot on the piston. It goes through these small holes, and then the oil goes back where it should be. Cool? Except those small holes would get like carboned up, and then the oil would stay on the cylinder wall. Then the piston would come down, and the oil would still be up on the cylinder wall. Then you'd have the combustion event where, we light the whole thing on fire, and that would actually burn the oil that was left on the cylinder wall. Now, where's the oil? Yeah, like we say gone, and gone's pretty true. So it's consuming the oil, it's eating it. But like what's crazy is that oil's not exactly gone. It's burnt, and now it's in this mix of spent inert gases, and it goes out the tailpipe. But it goes first through the catalytic converter, and the catalytic converter is not happy at all. The cat's like, I'm not going to do this very long. Make sense? So you get those cars and they're bulletproof. They just are. But as long as you keep oil in them, they're pretty bulletproof. Just put oil in there. It'll be all right. Like my old truck, Bessie, was the same way. Just put oil in there. It'll be fine. Until that oil consumption, that oil coats the catalytic converter. It's like a honeycomb. So it coats the catalyst. Now the catalytic converter is not able to effectively do the three-way chemical reaction. And before the cat, you've got oxygen up and down. And after the cat, you should have it be pretty smooth. But instead, after the cat, it looks the same as before the cat, which effectively means the catalytic converter is not doing anything. So a code is set. You get a check engine light on that sweet Toyota Matrix. P0420, and everybody remembers that number. I can't imagine why. Bank 1, catalyst low efficiency. And you're like, oh, catalytic converter. So what are you going to do? Put a catalytic converter in there. And it might fix it for a while. But what do you think is going to happen soon enough? Exactly. So here's a very disturbing statement. But I want to make sure you remember this. Someone said, wise person, cats don't die. They're murdered. Talking about catalytic converters now, you hear? All right. But that's why catalytic converters really shouldn't just like fail, right? So if the cat failed, you really might want to back up and be like, why did the cat fail? And if the cat failed because of oil consumption, because those little return holes on the pistons are carboned up, what do you think you really need to do to actually like fix it? Like a whole new engine or like a full rebuild of the engine? Like you're tearing that thing down. Remember, thousands. So if the customer's like, yeah, I'm struggling and like, but I could get by with doing an OEM cat that's $1,500, but I'll be totally tapped. Like I'll wipe out my savings and everything. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's ethical to tell the customer, hey, dump $1,500 into this because like you haven't addressed the real problem. So unfortunately, sometimes we got to be the bearer of bad news and be like, hey, this Matrix has got like 197,000 miles. We know it has oil consumption. I've checked the signs. There's signs. There's oil residue on your tailpipe. I noticed your oil level's low, but your oil change is only 1,000 miles ago. Like this engine is consuming oil. Do you want to fix the engine for $5,000? No. Well, then don't fix the cat because the cat's really just the symptom of the problem. Kind of makes sense? And that's again like the trend you're going to see. So let's just say we want to check for oil leaks or for oil consumption. I already mentioned there's some of those things. You look for the little signs like like just swipe the inside of the tailpipe. They're all going to have carbon, but if it's still slimy, that's usually oil. Or I've even seen, on some of those cars, or there's a number of different vehicles that are more prone to oil consumption issues. You'll actually see blue-gray smoke coming right out of the tailpipe. Or I've also seen where you look at the exhaust outlet and there's kind of like a dark, like you can just tell around the tailpipe, it's kind of dark. The dirt is sticking to it. It's because when oil comes out the tailpipe and gets on that back bumper, the dirt sticks to the oil. And for some reason, it's more dirty around there. Like there's these signs, you'd be like, ooh, that one's bad. Or you know what one of my favorites is? When you go to get on the freeway on-ramp and there's the little Honda Civic hatch, what they call it, like the EG or something. And you just see poof, cloud of smoke, and you can smell it and you're like, ooh, that thing's burning oil. Like there's signs. There's signs of these things. Typically it's higher mileage, but we see them with lower mileage sometimes too. So if it's consuming oil, one of the main tests that's pretty typical would be fill the oil right up to full, and then a lot of times what we'll actually do is we'll do some sort of anti-taper tape or paint where you put something on the valve cover up to the oil cap and you seal the dipstick and you seal the drain plug and you seal the oil pressure sensor, whatever, oil filter. You seal all these things and then you tell the customer go drive it for 800, 1,000 miles or whatever. Then when it comes back, we check the oil and we can tell how many quarts of oil has been consumed, right? Burned. I'm good with burned. How many quarts of oil has burned in that amount of time? Then you need to compare it to the manufacturer specifications. So if this was a GM 8.1 liter V8, that's, I tell you right now, that's going to consume a quart, even if it's in perfect condition. It's just how they are. But if it's like a modern 2-liter 4-cylinder, I don't think it should consume that much. But the manufacturer spec is going to really determine exactly how much it should consume. And if it's over that amount, you're like, hey, hold up, this is consuming excessive oil, like this engine needs to be redone or whatever. It's just going to result in various problems. If the engine's consuming oil through the piston rings, that's the most common. It could also be cylinder wear. So if it's like, hey, you got oil consumption, maybe it needs new rings. Yeah, maybe. But you have no way to diagnose if it's rings versus cylinder wear, right? Piston rings, parts are cheap, but the labor is expensive. If the cylinder itself is worn out, now you need to machine the block. And a lot of the modern blocks can't be machined. So you might sleeve it, you might have to replace the whole block. Realistically, you're probably looking at a whole complete total engine rebuild, right? So there's the idea of, oh, it just needs rings is like probably not going to happen. You know, you're going to tear it all the way down and throw rings in it, and then you're going to find that the cylinder is actually glazed and those rings aren't going to last. Like that's not really the right way to deal with it. Makes sense? So instantly it's expensive. Mm-hmm.
How would you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so here's what's kind of cool, and that's partially why the dipsticks here, hopefully you guys can see this. You see the low dot and then the high dot? That is almost always universally 1 quart. So that's part of the reason the manufacturer gives us that range. If you know the limits is 1 quart in 1,000 miles, and you have it here full when it leaves, and then when it comes back, it's halfway, you're fine. That's acceptable. Is it consuming oil? Yes, but guess what? They all consume oil. Every single engine is going to leave some amount of oil up on the cylinder in the cross hatching. That's to lubricate the rings. And some of that oil is consumed. So like they all do it. And there's no way to get it to be zero. So if someone says my engine doesn't burn oil, what they really more mean is like, it does, but it doesn't burn excessive oil. Trust me, they all consume oil. It's just how they're made, right? So this is a pretty good indication, you know, watching that oil level go down in a certain number of miles. But also, honestly, if you can see the blue-gray smoke, that's going to fail. I can tell you right now. Also in California specifically, that's one of the first tests they do. When you bring it in for a smog, they rev it up like this, boom, boom, and then they look at the back, and if it emits visible smoke, you're done. You failed already. Doesn't even matter if you've got all your monitors set and all that type of stuff. You're just done. All right, so that's pretty good. Probably for the oil consumption. And then it could be coolant consumption as well, right? So when we talk about coolant consumption is a bit different than oil. Every engine consumes some amount of oil because it's splashed on the cylinder wall and a little bit's left in the little scratches of the cross hatching. With coolant, there should be no consumption. It doesn't burn a little bit of coolant normally. Like if it's consuming coolant, there's something wrong. Now, what I have seen, I will tell you, is in some cooling systems, it's captured in a like a surge tank that's totally sealed. Those don't really lose anything to evaporation, but I've seen in another type where it puts it in like just a basic bottle with the flip open cap that's not real well sealed. Those can lose a little bit of coolant due to evaporation, but it's actually really the water evaporating out. The coolant material like the antifreeze doesn't really evaporate. It stays. It's kind of slimy and slippery. So if it has a little bit of low coolant, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's consuming it. The most common thing is actually an external leak. But Coolant leaks are kind of funny because your cooling system is pressurized. So if you've got, let's say, maybe you have a leaking gasket, maybe a head gasket like this Explorer, I presume is a head gasket, or maybe it's an external gasket to the thermostat housing. That gasket may not leak until it hits, let's say, 13.5 psi. Make sense? If you shut the car off, you pull in the shop and you shut the car off, you're not at 13.5 psi. The heat makes it pressurized. Once you shut the engine off, it's losing, as it gets cooler and cooler, it's losing pressure. So the way we really diagnose coolant leaks is we actually pressure test them. So if the system's designed to run 15 psi, we pressure test it to 15. And then like the way I would do it, I would go do another job. I'd leave it at 15 and I'd come back and I'd check the gauge. I wouldn't just go by the gauge because sometimes the gauge has an internal leak or something. But if I leave pressure on it for an hour, what was a tiny drip becomes a puddle on the floor. And I'm like, oh, this is definitely leaking coolant. Now I'm more likely to find where it's leaking coolant externally. Kind of makes sense? Now, part of the reason we're concerned about this is, well, two ways. Would you say an engine is performing correctly if it's overheating? No, that's not a good performing engine. It's overheating. It's running too hot. It's boiling coolant out of it. Those are some of the people that are pulled over on the side of the road, right? So an external leak will cause an engine to overheat. They don't run cool when there's no coolant in them. They don't run cool when there's water, when there's air bubbles in the coolant. That tends to cause the thermostat not to really open up. So like an engine performance concern can absolutely be an external coolant leak. It's just external coolant leaks aren't really that hard to figure out. Pressure test it and look for the drops, look for the puddle. Make sense? If you don't have a pressure tester, you're not gonna be able to diagnose the car. It's not really rocket science. Many people tell me, oh yeah, I got a problem with overheating and the coolant's low. And I'm like, well, where's the leak? They're like, it doesn't have one. Well, if the coolant's low, it's got a leak. How do you know it doesn't have a leak? Well, I don't see anything. Did you pressure test it? No. Conversation's over. Not even going to deal with it. This is not. You got a question? You just stretching. Yeah. Go ahead, shoot it.
So I had a failing water pump.
Sure.
And so my car started overheating.
Yeah.
I had to keep refilling the coolant. So
yeah.
Was going low.
Sure.
And so they replaced the water pump and then kind of solved the problem. I wasn't like losing coolant anymore. Is that like a possibility or would it have been leaking? I didn't do it. I probably
yeah, that's common though. So yeah, so I'll tell it back to you. Make sure I got it right. Your car was overheating periodically. Yeah. You were adding coolant. So like based on those two, it's possible that the overheating is boiling the coolant and pushing the coolant out, or it's possible that your coolant is going low, which will cause overheating. I'm going to say it sounds to me, and the more common would be you have a coolant leak. It goes low. It then overheats. So why is it overheating? Because it's low on coolant. Why is it low on coolant? Because you have a leak. It's very simple. Like we do this all the time. So they just pressure tested it, or sometimes water pumps are fun. Water pumps sometimes will leak when they're not running and not leak when they are running, or they'll leak when they're running but not leak when they're not running. So like water pumps they just do a thing, and then you're like, oh, the water pump's leaking, typically out of the little hole, the weep hole, and you put a new water pump on there, or the shop did, we, the technicians, we put the water pump on there, we refill the correct amount of coolant, which is water antifreeze mixed, usually 50-50, and then we bleed the air out of it. If there's air bubbles in the system, like an air pocket, it'll go up against the thermostat and the thermostat won't open, right? So we could spend a lot of time on the cooling system. We'll keep it simple, but thermostat's job is to open to start the cooling process. If there's an air pocket right there, it ain't gonna open up and you're gonna overheat just due to the air. That's probably the main reason it overheated was you had a bunch of air down at the thermostat because the coolant was low. So once they bleed the air out, I would repressure test it. If it holds pressure and I see no leaks after an hour, I'd cut it back to you and it'd be fine. Yeah, it happens all the time. That's a good job they did.
Yeah, and so like you were saying that it's pressurized.
Yeah.
So it's down, it's not really pressurized.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yeah, sometimes that's pretty common. Like let's say you had a major leak. You have a hose that's got a cut in it. You're gonna put coolant in it, it's gonna drip right back on your shoes, and you'll be like, what's up? Oh, there's a leak. It's easy. Everybody can fix those. It's the ones that don't leak when you're checking them, when the car is off, when it's cooling down. By the time you pressure test them, all those mysteries are gone because you're like, oh, there's a leak right there. Yeah. So the coolant, the pressure testers, just so we can find it. Because when we're driving it, it's operating at some amount of pressure. It varies by the car and it varies by the temperature. But if the car is designed to run up to 15 psi, and it was hot last week, right? I bet you all your cars were up at that, all the way up at the 15 number because it was hot. They got to be able to hold the 15. We got to pressure test them at 15. There's no point in checking for leaks if you're not at 15. Mm-hmm. Let's say you did get an air pocket. Sure. Yeah, air pockets are common. Varies by vehicle. Some have the little bleeder, some do, some don't. A lot of times the manufacturer specifies how they want you to bleed the air out, but it's not unheard of for us to get a car in with an overheating engine performance concern, and all we need to do is get the air pocket out. Like one of the cars we used to have, that my wife loved this car, a 2005 350Z. They have the nice low sloping hood and all that. That car is notorious for air pockets. So one day she was driving, it started to run a little bit hot. And I was kind of like, it's probably all right. And then like it was one of those crazy times where it went from hot to like 2 days later it was cold. And she's like, yeah, the heat doesn't work. And I was like, underperforming heat in the cold and also overheating in the hot, that really sounds like an air pocket. And all I did was I backed it out of the garage. I got it so the front wheels were up like kind of on the sidewalk where it goes uphill a little bit. When I got it uphill, that was able to get the heater core low enough where the air pocket finally came out and got up into the radiator, which I had the cap off and a funnel in there. So it was literally just one little air pocket causing all that stuff. So I'm the hero. What can I say? And it cost me nothing. So yeah, this is all base engine stuff. The leaks are usually fairly simple. The air pockets are usually fairly simple. However, I'll give you a specific example. We had another Subaru, you might notice a trend. And I'll give you the whole real story so you understand all the way just how difficult these can be. Was this car would overheat like intermittently. And it was a friend. He's like a pretty good friend. He's a Ford tech, good at his job. Left the Ford dealer and then was doing what I was doing. We were both doing diesel. We were diesel mechanics on locomotives, which was a cool job. But it's his sister-in-law. Yeah, so it's his wife's sister. Has a newborn. They live in Dana Point. I'm sorry, the weather's so good in Dana Point. Like the whole story isn't going to make sense, but then it kind of does. In Dana Point, newborn, couldn't sleep, could only sleep if it's like 60 degrees. Can't get the place to 60 degrees. I'm like, Dana Point, the weather's amazing. Yeah, but it ain't 60. And those houses on the beach, they don't have AC. So you know what you do? Bring the baby down to the Subaru, get the Subaru set up, and just idle the Subaru all night long, 8, 9, 10 hours a night, and try to get the baby to sleep. So that was not really what the car is made for. All right. So I'm going to tell you a story about the Subaru, but don't think I'm putting Subaru down. No car is made to be idling in the driveway for 8, 9, 10 hours a day after day after day after day. But I kind of get it. She was stressed out and place doesn't have AC. And I think it was like an apartment, so they couldn't put something in the window. So she just used the car. It overheats, but it doesn't always overheat. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So I talk with him and he's like, yeah, I got it figured out. It's just the thermostat. He diagnosed the thermostat correctly. We talked about how he did it. He measured the temperature in the engine and just outside the thermostat. And the engine was hot, and after the thermostat, it was cold. So therefore, coolant's not flowing. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's thermostat all day. That's how they fail. That's normal. So he didn't go to AutoZone this time. He went to O'Reilly's, and he put the thermostat in there. And it seemed good for like a week. And then she called back. She's like, hey, it overheated again, and the baby's crying, and everybody's freaking out. And now this guy, he lives more like closer to me. So like I think he's in Menifee now. But yeah, he was in Menifee then too. So he's leaving Menifee and he's going over the Ortega Highway, over an hour to get into Dana Point with a few tools, bringing his tools in the back of his car and his whatever, and like working on it in the driveway. So I was kind of like, dude, like you're the man, but don't, you know, you're setting yourself up for some failure there. Like you're in the driveway working on the thing, but fine. And he's like, you know what? It was an aftermarket thermostat, and we agreed he should probably do an OEM. So Subaru OEM puts a Subaru OEM one in, coolant bleeds it, all that type of stuff. It's all good for 2 weeks. And then what do you think happened? Overheats again. And then we start talking more seriously. Normally, when it doesn't open, it's because there's an air pocket, right? But like he bled it, and it was good for 2 weeks. So how in the world is there another air pocket? All right, but here's something that was kind of shocking. Well, I'll tell you what's wrong with it, and I'll tell you why it makes sense. The Subaru had a blown head gasket. And what would happen was when the engine would run, it'd make compression 200 psi, and through the tiny leak in the head gasket, it would push a little bit of compression or combustion gas into the cooling system. A little bit, a little bit, a little bit. After a couple of weeks of idling all night, next thing you know, you got a big fat air pocket, goes against the thermostat. Thermostat doesn't open. Diagnose it as a thermostat, but really it was an air pocket. So I'm going to say, like, truthfully, it was a misdiagnosis, but like it was a very forgivable one that was like, hey, dude, like it makes sense. Like I might have misdiagnosed that one myself. So I'm not going to stand here saying I make no mistakes, but like what I'm trying to move you towards is like, do the diagnosis and try to actually nail the problem rather than just throw parts at it and just see what sticks, So what he did made sense. Then he had to tell her, hey, I think it could be more major, but I only have my tools in the back of my car. So he ended up doing a block test, which uses I think I even have it later in the slides, is a chemical that you put in the cooling system, and you pull air bubbles through it. And if those air bubbles have combustion gases, it changed the chemical from blue to yellow, and it failed. So it was like, hey, you definitely got exhaust, you got combustion gases in your coolant. Like that's typically a head gasket. You need to do a head gasket. This guy did a head gasket in the driveway with the tools out of his car. I mean, he's pretty serious. Like I was impressed. Given Dana Point's pretty excellent, so I might have considered doing it. But like I don't need it that bad. Plus, we were still working nights. He was working all night long and then going and working on this in the day. So he did solid for sister-in-law, really good. But the problem was when he went to do it, something was up with the torque wrench or something, and he ended up breaking off a bolt right in the block. So at that point, I'm like, dude, just stop, just tow it to my school, and we'll hook it up. And we did the whole thing. We went through everything, got all new head bolts because those are one-time use, torque to yield stretch bolts. Totally hooked the car up, and the car's been good for years. But like, just kind of showing you the evolution of, it was a cheap fix, right? A $30 thermostat until it wasn't, and it was head gaskets on a Subaru in the driveway with the engine jacked up, right? So like, if I could have gone back in time with him, I think what I would have told him was just what I did on the Explorer, because this is kind of new. Back in the day, nice cameras to go down the cylinder were expensive. I'd have got a $50 Amazon endoscopic camera, sent it down in the cylinder and pressure tested it and left the pressure on it overnight and came back the next day and saw if there's any coolant in the cylinder, right? That would have nailed it down. And now knowing that Subarus do tend to do that a little bit, I might have recommended that to the customer, like, hey, it seems like a thermostat, but it could be an air pocket, and the air pocket could be coming from the head gasket. So do you want to pay, I don't know, I might have billed like 2 hours of labor. Do you want to pay 2 hours of labor for me to really check the head gasket out, or do you want to just proceed with the thermostat? I would have let them decide. But what I would not have had was a week later, hey, you misdiagnosed it. I'd have been like, hey, we tried the thermostat. Remember, like that was cheaper, but you didn't really authorize the time to really go through and see if the engine was good. So now we can do that if you want. You rolled the dice. You rolled the dice. I didn't roll the dice. Make sense? I don't want to roll the dice. Then it's hard to get paid. When I roll the dice and they don't hit, it's hard to bill. I think that those Subarus have a little bit of a weak link in the head gaskets. I've heard that, but she was stressing it to the max. When you're sitting there idling, you have limited airflow. You're relying on the cooling fan. When you're running the AC itself generates a lot of heat. I mean, that's asking a lot. As yeah, oh yeah, yep. So it's like, I'm not picking on the car brand as much as like, hey, people are going to use the car how they're going to use it. And in this case, that's like me telling any of you to be like, you know what I want you to do is go sit out in that parking lot and just like walk in place for 10 hours. Be like, if you don't have a perfect health, I'm not sure you're going to survive it. And the Subaru didn't. So it all came back to the base engine though. So you see the common theme was like, we're going after these engine performance concern, and it ended up being the engine itself. Cool. So like another potential sign of head gasket failure. You guys ever heard of like the milkshake engine? So you go and you check the oil and it looks like a mocha coca frappuccino or whatever. It's all like looking delicious, but it does not taste good. Don't do that. I can tell you. So what's kind of cool is if you were to take that brown, frothy, foamy oil and you were to actually put it in a container and leave it for like days on end, what's crazy is it'll actually separate like this. So when you see the foamy mocha cocacino, it's actually really like this much coolant and this much oil, but it's all mixed together because that's what we call an intermix. They're all like blended and foamed up. If you separate them or if you let it sit for a while, it'll separate. So if you have coolant in the oil, how'd it get there? That could be the head gasket, and that's very possible. But anytime it's the head gasket, it could also be the block is cracked or warped, or the head is warped or cracked. And we don't know until we tear it down. And we got to do some straight edge checks and do some dye testing. And, we got to do a lot of stuff to determine that it's actually the head gasket. But either way, we know that it's in the engine. Now, there's another possibility. If this has an oil cooler and the oil cooler itself fails, coolant and oil could start to mix, right? So what we don't want to do is start selling a bunch of stuff on this when we have potentially a warped head. What's pretty common on this actually is Cadillac North Star. It's a great engine. It was sort of a great. It's a nice engine when you're the driver, not as nice if you're paying the bills and working on it and stuff, but like those had an issue where it was one of the earliest aluminum engines from GM. They're always cast iron blocks, very predictable. Then they went to the North Star and like all aluminum, lightweight, pretty impressive. The head bolts that hold the head to the block go into aluminum. Okay. That's the first point I want to make. Over time, the aluminum would start to fail and the bolts would kind of like pull out a little bit. And you could try to tighten them, but it would just rip the aluminum out. So it was a head gasket failure, right? But in reality, it was the block aluminum couldn't hold the tension on the head bolts. So what's the fix on that? A block, an engine. Maybe you tear it all down and you drill them over and you put big thread inserts in them, or like other people would have the blocks like studded, and that's a big deal. That's a big problem. So my wife's grandmother had a North Star, and it was like her pride and joy. They bought it brand new, 96 El Dorado coupe, pristine condition, like 60,000 miles pristine. And then she took it into the shop, and I think the problem was overheating. And they put some stuff. I think they even put a water pump on there. They threw some stuff on there. And I don't know how much of it was a misdiagnosis, probably all of it. But you never know. So then they really get to look at it a little bit more seriously. And they're like, hey, your head gasket's blown, but we don't want to get involved. So then she asked me to look at it. And there was some of these types of symptoms. And in various ways, it was like, yeah, it's head gasket, but these are known to lift, to pull the bolts. And they're also known, if you don't do a lot of like regular coolant replacements, coolant wears out. It's like oil, except, lasts a little bit longer. But if you don't do it, that coolant becomes more acidic or can conduct electricity more. It'll get electrolysis and it'll actually corrode the surface. So you'll have a nice cylinder head with a bunch of pitting and corrosion, almost looks like rust. You can't seal that. Now what do? Like, I don't really, maybe try to machine it's a mess. So my recommendation was, Granny, if you really want the car to be legit, you got to put an engine in it. All right, that's what you got to do. That engine was 12 grand. Then she needed a radiator. So the bill was $13,000 parts and labor. So they put, I got her a pretty good deal, but they didn't rebuild the engine. She put a Jasper engine in. So Jasper does remands. And when I called them as a representative of school, got the school price, but they're like, we don't have any of those right now. So I'm like, well, do a search, get a junkyard one or whatever, get it all built and hooked up, and then, ship it. And so she sent it to Cadillac of Escondido and had them do the work. So she probably could have got a little cheaper with labor, but, still talking retail price, even with the discount on the parts, was 12 grand just for the engine installed. And the Jasper was a good idea to me because it had a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty. Whereas if you just try to do the head gasket and stuff and it fails in 6 months, like, what do you do? Or like some shops will do a 1-year, 12,000 mile warranty. So Jasper with the 3-year unlimited, I thought was good. And yeah, yeah. So they have their own way. Jasper has their own way of dealing with that. I don't exactly know what it is. So you kind of caught it. If it's still going in aluminum, there's the failure point still there, So like by the time we get to that point, I'm kind of like, I don't know, I'm personally not going to get involved in those because that has the potential to be a comeback. And that's going to be a theme with us is like, you want to get it diagnosed correctly and do a good fix where it's not going to come back. I'm not trying to make you able to do the jobs cheaper. Okay. My focus is more doing it legit and doing it quality and having it be reliable. Okay. And that's mostly what the industry wants right now. In fact, if you want to do it cheaper, you don't come to school because this is an expense. So I'm not even really going to try to do all the shortcuts, just how to make it really a good quality. Cool. So that's another example of why you wouldn't want to throw a bunch of parts on an engine if it's going to need a new engine. Kind of makes sense. So let's say that you're looking for, leaks with oil or coolant. Another thing to keep in your back pocket is you can use ultraviolet dye, and then you can check it with a black light, and that can be an indication of where the leak is. I don't usually use that one, but you can. All right, so let's say another clue to the engine. One of the first things we could do, if you remember that sample question we looked at, it's a good idea to do a road test. I don't call it a test drive because a test drive to me means you're testing it to see if you like it, see if you want to buy it. I'm going to do a road test. And the reason I say a road test is because I'm using the road to test the car. So could I check compression? Yes. Could I also take it out on the road and drive it and get a sense of what the compression is? Yes. So therefore, to me, it's a road test. I'm using the road. And if I road test it and I get that smoke, look at this, gray blue. What do you think that gray blue indicates? Oil consumption. So maybe rings, head gasket, valve guides, oil seals, these types of things. We don't know. Now, like, I'll give you a little bonus. If it's rings, typically when you gas it hard, like when you're wide open, remember that little Civic I told you about when it gets on the on-ramp? When they're wide open, if it's smoking in those instances, I'm probably thinking rings. But when I say rings, just understand that could be worn cylinders, but I'm saying bottom end, that's below the head gasket. Whereas let's say under wide open throttle, it seems pretty good. Under wide open throttle, you don't make a lot of vacuum. So there's not a lot of suction in the intake and in the intake port. But on decel, you let off the gas and you go, brrr. Sound pretty good for like a B series, huh? Like that. That's when you build a lot of vacuum. And if it's valve guide seals, it'll suck the oil past the leaking seal and you'll get like a lot of smoke on decel. So literally just being behind a car as they accelerate and decelerate, I can get a pretty good idea. On Excel, that's probably bottom end, rings and stuff. On decel, that's probably more like worn valves, worn valve guides, or valve guide seals. Another thing is rings usually wear with miles. They go up and down. So the more they go up and down, the more they wear. Valve guide seals are different. Valve guide seals tend to harden up if it sits. So if it's like a customer that doesn't drive the car and it's 30 years old and it smokes on startup, I'm like, valve guide seals is pretty typical, right? If the valve guide seal's leaking and it's up here and the oil runs down on the seal and the seal's leaking, it'll do drip, drip. It'll do tiny drips overnight. And then on a cold start, it'll puff blue smoke out in the morning. And then it gets better the longer it runs. I'm thinking more valve guide seals, right? So if we talked about the cat, if you have oil consumption that's killing the catalytic converter, you might have to replace your whole engine, or you could do some of those advanced diagnosis and just observations and be like, this is valve guide seals. We could do the valve guide seals, maybe a couple $1,000, maybe $1,000. But if you need to do rings, maybe $2,000-$3,000, so we could present that as an option, or you tell the customer you need a whole new engine every time. That's kind of more what they do in Japan. That's why they have all these Japanese engines with low miles for cheap, right? They'll be like, hey, when your engine's 3 years old, you got to get a new one because we know those be consuming oil. So like there's different ways to approach this. Here's another good clue. What if you pulled a spark plug out and it looked like that? You see that one? That thing is coated with oil. Now they could be carboned up, but the carbon doesn't build up like that. And if you were to grab that and wipe your finger on it, you're actually going to be oily on your finger. So that'd be like, oh yeah, this has got a lot of consumption. So if the car came in for a misfire and you pulled the spark plug, sometimes we read the spark plugs. It's what we do. You're like, whoa, this one's got a whole bunch of oily carbon on it. Like that's oil. Where's the oil coming from? Somewhere internal to the engine, bottom end, top end, hard to say. Are you going to put a new spark plug in it? Well, you can, but what's going to happen in a new spark plug is going to end up the same. So like, you just got to know what you're getting into there. I would have a real serious talk with the customer and be like, look, this has oil consumption. It's excessive. It's probably misfiring because that spark plug is oil fouled. I'll put a spark plug in and it might stop misfiring today, but like pretty quickly it's going to come back and start misfiring again, which if that's all you want to do, cool. That is up to the customer. But make no mistake, it's going to come back. And at that point, you don't want the customer to be like, hey, you told me it was going to be fixed and now it's back. And then you're like, well, it needs an engine. And they're like, I'm not paying for an engine. You didn't tell me it was that. I paid you the last time to fix it. I paid you $200. And you're like, yeah, now you need to pay me $5,000. So it's just a whole bad, you don't really want those. You don't really even want that encounter. You don't want that whole interaction. It's not good. Mm-hmm. It's all right. Sure. All right. Now, I'm going to put these on so I'm a different person. If it was my piece of junk car, would I? Heck yeah. You would have loved Bessie. Did you know on Bessie, I had to put a quart of oil in Bessie every day. It was burning so much oil. But I was a college student. I didn't really have the money. I was just trying to get by. So like, we can make these cars keep going if you want to. Put a spark, I wouldn't even change the spark plugs. I'd pull them out and I would actually wire brush those. Now, wire brushing would scrape off the fancy iridium laser coating and they wouldn't last as long. But so I'm doing what I'm not supposed to do, but like, I don't care. I'm just trying to get it to run a little bit better so I can get to school and get to work and get to home. And home, that was pretty much when I was in your shoes. That was my little triangle: home, school, work, home, school, work. And ultimately the reason I would probably milk it like that and just try to get it by is because I don't have the money for a real replacement. But what I'm not doing, I'm not delirious in my brain saying like, oh, it's going to be fine. I'm more like, I pray that Bessie makes it till I graduate. And then when Bessie does, I'm going to get a more reliable car. And actually, when I got close to graduation, I totally rebuilt that engine. I went all through it, hooked it all up, honed the cylinders and put rings and stuff. And then it was reliable. So for a while, I did the type of stuff you're saying. And there's nothing wrong with doing that for the customer as long as you're honest about it. The problem you got is when you tell the customer, I'll put spark plugs in it. What the customer heard is like, all I need is spark plugs and it's going to be good. And in 2 months when it's bad again, they're going to be mad at you. So just make sure you're really honest with the customer. Or if it's yours, just make sure you're honest with yourself. Like this someday, you can only kick this can down the road for for so long. Like, this one's going to blow up. This one's going to bite you. And Bessie did, by the way. Bessie locked up solid, seized on the way to work. I literally had to hold it, pedal to the metal to get it to pull into the dealership. And then when I shut the engine off, Bessie never restarted again until I redid that engine. No, it was just, it had burned so much oil, it actually broke one of the skirts off the piston and it totally seized in the bore. Like, it was messed up. And I think part of it was because it was so worn, it was getting so loose, the piston was actually like getting crooked in the bore. And then one day it just was like, I mean, I could still hear the noise it made. But like, it wasn't a big deal because I knew it was coming. But, you know, I probably should have just bought a new engine, but it was like $200 cheaper to rebuild it. So I was like, oh, I'll save the money. It was a good experience, but it was totally a waste of money. Bessie was a good girl, though. I have pictures of Bessie. Maybe I'll show you on canvas. All right, what if you're behind the car and you get white smoke? You might even say like steam. Yeah, so coolant and water, because remember, coolant's like half water. So if you're behind it and it looks like it's like Stanley steamer, you're like, hey, why is that steaming so much? I want to make sure I'm clear. One of the byproducts of combustion in the catalytic converter is water, though. So every exhaust has water in it. All right. So if you see water dripping out the exhaust, it's not a big deal. That's fine. They all do that. But if you have like clouds of smoke, in the morning, you might have a little bit, right? Because there's some water that's burning off the exhaust and stuff. But like clouds of smoke while driving, no, that's not good. That'd be water consumption or coolant consumption. And then I was saying the spark plugs on those will be not like this at all. They're very clean, but they sometimes have little shiny deposits on them. I've even seen, if I send a camera down there and it's got coolant leaking into the cylinder, it'll look like someone steam cleaned the cylinder. You'll look at 3 of them and they'll be kind of dark and carbon. You look at one and be like, wow, that looks brand new. Yeah, that's because there's coolant going into it and the whole thing is steaming in there and it's all very clean. Kind of like when you clean the barbecue or the stove, you spray a little water while it's hot and it breaks that carbon up, looks shiny. That happens inside the engine. You already know there's coolant going in there. Plus the coolant loss was a clue. And then when we do some of these, we're going to do a bunch of tests. Compression tests can indicate this somewhat. If you have a huge coolant leak into the cylinder, it'll also leak compression out of the cylinder, so it might make it a little low. But usually the leaks aren't that big. And it'd be the same with oil. So like if you have oil consumption and you do a compression test, that's already telling you like you're losing compression just the same way that it's consuming oil. So we're going to do some tests to show you how to narrow down where the leak is. But for right now, we're focused on if there's a leak, what are the clues and what'll it cause, right? So we'll get a little bit more on that too. All right, so what if the engine has a noise? There's some things that can cause engine noises. There's some things that can cause engine vibration. But ultimately, let's say the engine is knocking. We need to diagnose that. You need to diagnose why the engine's knocking. Don't be bolting stuff onto it. So I'll give you like another example. Let's say the engine's not knocking, but it's whining, right? A whining engine could be something like maybe timing chain or an oil pump, but it could also be a belt-driven accessory, an alternator, power steering, water pump, these types of things. So customers will come in and say, hey, my engine's making a noise. That's still an engine performance concern. It may have full power, but they're still like, hey, I've got a concern about how my engine's performing. Some of the things we'll do, just using the stethoscope, you see them right there, you're gonna look like a doctor. Matter of fact, if you want to look really smart, just wear these around everywhere you go. You just look good. But you notice it has a different end on it. It doesn't have like a big cup that you put up against your heart. It's just got a little point. So if you think the noise is coming from the alternator, you put the point on the alternator and you listen through the stethoscope. And if it gets really loud on the alternator, then you move it to the engine and it's quieter, and you move it to the alternator and it's louder, kind of telling you the noise is from the alternator. You could also take the belt off, at which point the alternator will stop spinning. And if the noise goes away with all the belts off, that means it's not the engine. The engine's good because you start it and the engine's turning, but there's no more noise. It's because the belt was turning all these accessories. It's one of those. It's like there's some quick tests you could do. Or let's say you've got a ticking noise and you think the ticking noise could be like maybe it's down in the bottom like a rod knock, or maybe it's up in the top like a lifter. Using this stethoscope at different points can give you a pretty good indication of where it's coming from, so you can go ahead and proceed. Now, beyond this, I don't go real crazy because I'd say this really needs to remain A1. Engine performance doesn't talk a lot about noises and knocks and vibrations and stuff. All right, but just know if it comes in with those types of things, it could be the engine, it could need a whole engine, or it could need something very simple. So don't sell a whole engine and then come to find out it was an idler pulley that was $9. Okay, make sense? Be thorough with it. Be thorough. Lifters more like a tick, 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 but they can come and go kind of. I have a couple examples of those that I could share with you. A VVTI, those are more common. Let's say it's a Ford F-150 EcoBoost. Those would be like, I'll actually try to make the noise. Let's say that you go out to the car and you go to fire it up, and on initial startup, it's like, and then it's fine. You're like, what the heck was all that? It's really common for those VVTI gears. They get worn, and when you first start the engine, there's no oil pressure, so there's stuff banging around. And then when the oil pressure hits, it tightens the things up and it quiets down. So it could be usually that once you diagnose one and you like hear it, you kind of get a feel for it, but it's very hard for you to explain to someone else how to tell. You know what I mean? Kind of like a wheel bearing noise. Like I can try to make the wheel bearing noise and you'll be like, that doesn't sound anything like it. But like once you hear a wheel bearing noise and then you jump in another car and you're like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. It's a little bit similar. So if it's a VVTI gear noise, that's not a horribly hard job. Whereas if it's a lifter, you're probably going to pull the head on that and go through it. Whereas if it's a piston slap, that is probably going to be like a major, major overhaul. Because if the piston is loose in the groove, you know what's actually really common on those, all the LSs, they have a normal piston slap. So like your piston doesn't fit perfectly round to your perfectly round cylinder. Your cylinder should be round. Your piston's actually a concentrically ground, so it's an oval when it's cold. They make the piston an oval when it's cold so that when it's hot, it becomes round. So when you first start up, there's like clatter. There's just like knock, 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 and you're like, this thing sounds crazy. And then after 30 seconds, you're like, oh, never mind, it's all right. Every day, every morning, on all those, a 4.8, a 5.3, a 5.7, a 6 liter, a 6.2, all those engines have a similar type of piston slap. And that's normal. But if you have one that's really worn like Bessie, that piston was actually getting crooked in the bore. That thing had a lot of piston slap, even well after it was warmed up. So like I had low compression, my cylinder leakage test would fail, I had oil consumption, I had piston slap. Like there was 4 different ways that I knew my cylinders were worn and my pistons were worn, and that engine needed to really be like totally redone. But I didn't have the money. So I put the spark plugs in it and I put some oil in there and I sent it until it locked up solid in the dealership, in the parking lot too. I mean, like the last mile, I'm pretty sure if I were to let off the gas, it would have died on the side of the road. But I just put the hammer down and it made it to the parking lot and died right there. Oh, it had undescribable sounds, special sounds, unique one of a kind sounds, knocking, clattering. It had it out. It had it all. And I literally found a piece of the piston skirt like laying in the oil pan. I when I say I rebuilt it, that block was so trashed. I actually bought a junkyard block and I start over with that one. So it was fun. It's a perfect thing to do when you're 20 years old and you just finally start to make enough money where you can fix it, but not so much where you can just be like, give me a new car. It's perfect timing for me. All right, so like kind of summarizing what I had already said. Some of the noises could be simple. It could just be like a belt type of thing, but it could also be like the knock of death, a rod knock. And it could be anywhere in between. So we don't want to condemn the engine if it's not the engine, but we also don't want to chase external things if it is the engine, right? So that's just kind of the trend we're going into here, right? So like a loud knocking noise, that's a rod, that's going to be down in the engine, or any of these mains, right? So we'll talk about some of these bearings. All these bearings, I would say, are like the weak point of the engine, but that's like how I'm going to describe it. It's very easy to damage a bearing. So if you run low on oil, you could damage a bearing. If you have coolant going into the oil, that's not going to lubricate it correctly, you damage a bearing. If you, for whatever reason, went in there and you didn't, let's say you took some apart and you weren't careful, and you get some debris down in the engine, which I have done before, I'm afraid to say, you could damage a bearing. These bearings are not, they're just not that tough. Like the bearing is specifically a soft piece of metal so that the crankshaft and the block don't wear each other out. We put a soft piece of metal that's going to take all the wear. That's cool. The negative is it's easy to wear it out. So like you could easily damage it. You could literally scratch it with your fingernail. So these bearings are sensitive. And if the bearing fails, it's a big deal. Like you got to do a rebuild. It's kind of a big thing. If it's a main, and without going too crazy into engines, the main bearings support the center line of the crankshaft to the block. Those tend to be more like a deeper thud. If it's a rod bearing, those actually take the power of the power stroke onto the rod, and they push on a journal and they spin the rod. So what's kind of cool is if you have a knock and you think it might be a rod bearing, we can disable the cylinder. Let's say it's a number 2. Let's say we disable cylinder number 2 by disconnecting the ejector, the coil, and the knock goes away. I'm like pretty much nailed it down that it's a number 2 rod. Because if I take away the power stroke, it's no longer pushing down hard on it. And if it's a bad rod bearing, it makes noise when it pushes down on it. Makes sense? So like I can be like, hey, we diagnosed your knock. It seems like it's pretty much the number 2 rod bearing. To know the details, we got to tear it all down. But like within my diagnosis window of an hour, I can tell whether it's a main or a rod. Kind of doesn't matter because either way it needs to be rebuilt, but like at least the customer knows it's definitely down in the bottom end. It's not like a ticking lifter or something. At which point maybe you don't take the engine apart, maybe you don't take the engine out and reassemble it for a lifter. If it's a bearing, that engine's coming out. It's not really practical to just try to do a bearing. You're going through the whole thing. It's the way it is. All right, and then there's like piston pins and various other types of noises that, we could go over each noise. It's not super critical other than to understand we can do some diagnosis to determine what noise it is, to make a recommendation for the customer. Like let's say a main bearing, for example, that's not going to cause a misfire. But if we got a car that came in for a misfire and it's also got a bearing noise, I'd probably go after the bearing noise first, because if it's a main bearing or a rod bearing, like that's a full rebuild. I don't think I'd put a bunch of money into fixing this misfire when there's a major problem with the bearing. Cool. So some of that's just making sure we're got the right perspective. Cool. And we could go more, but I think we're pretty solid on those. All right. So let's say we're just going to jump into one of our first tests. There's many tests we could do. Part 2 goes over more of the tests. Part 1's mostly about the engine and then a little bit about the tests. If we thought that we were going to do, if we thought we had low compression, we would do compression tests. If we thought that we had a problem with a valve, or like anything in the valve train, we might actually do a vacuum test, right? So when we start talking about this stuff, just keep in mind, you have to understand how the engine works and then be able to determine what test to do to tell whether or not you're correct. So when that Ford Explorer, when he gave that Ford Explorer to me for a misfire, and I was already kind of thinking about it. I was like, well, are you losing coolant? And he said, yeah, a little bit. So as soon as he said yes to a misfire and yes, I'm losing coolant, I already had in my mind what I thought Could be wrong. Could I diagnose it? No. But I had an idea of what it could be. The next test I want to do, you could do the compression test, but the real test I want to do is actually coolant pressure test and put a camera down in the cylinder. Make sense? So if you get to that point and you can understand exactly how it works and then understand the symptoms, you'll know which test to do first. So what I could have done if I had less experience has been like, well, I want to do a vacuum test on the engine. And I would have found absolutely nothing. And then I would have been like, let me do a compression test, and I would have found a little bit. Then I could have said, let me do a cylinder leakage test, and I might have found something, but maybe yes, maybe no. Could have done a relative compression test. Could have done all these tests, and I would have spent a couple 1 or 2 hours getting to where I was able to kind of like jump to more quickly. Make sense? So it's very important we know exactly how this engine works so we can interpret the test, and also you might pick one test over the other based on the symptoms. All right, cool. So like the compression test is just one example. That'd be a good test to do. Exactly. Everything we're going to talk about for this, for today and for next week, which would be your recorded, is all testing the mechanical engine. All of it's testing the mechanical engine. Every test we're going to talk about. All right. So let's say for this example, we have a running issue received. Let's go with, I'm going to pick a Tahoe that I did kind of recently. Customer's concern, right? This is what's on the RO is engine. Yeah, customer states, check engine light is flashing and the engine feels rough. That was the concern. So like, all right, what's rough mean? Well, the flashing check engine light, honestly, that already tells me everything I need to know. When a check engine light flashes, that means it's a catalyst damaging misfire. So do you know what a misfire means? It means it's missing a fire. That's what it means. So like one cylinder is not firing. Okay, cool. At least one. So if it's got a flashing light, I'm like, all right, it's got a misfire. So this is a mechanical concern. Could it be ignition? Yes. Could it be fuel? Yes. Could it also be engine mechanical? Yes. If I'm using this one as an example, you already know probably where this is going to go, right? So talk with the guy, nice guy. He already had somebody else look at it. It had all new spark plugs in it, and it had markings on the coils where they had been moved all over the place. And it had like one new connector on the injector, and it kind of looked like the fuel rail had been off. So I'm like, all right, somebody's been trying to move stuff around, figure this out. Unsuccessfully, clearly. So what should I do? Verify the mechanical integrity of any engine that happens to come in for work. So like, I'm not saying if the customer comes in and says, hey, I got a low tire in the back, you're like, I need to check your engine. But like, this is a misfire. This is something that could absolutely be the engine. You probably need to really check that out, right? So the previous person who worked on it, new spark plugs, new connector on the injector, a bunch of time moving stuff around. Totally misdiagnosed it. What should I do? Well, let me check it out. How can I verify the mechanical integrity? Well, in this case, because it's a misfire, right? There's tests I could do, all those tests I mentioned. I could also, by the way, check oil pressure. I could coolant pressure test it. There's a whole bunch of tests I could roll out on this engine. But if it's a misfire, the number one thing I'm concerned about with the engine is it making compression, right? For that cylinder to fire, we needed to pull in fresh air and fuel. We need to compress it to a good number of PSI, like within spec. And then we need to light the spark the spark plug, light the thing on fire and get a power stroke. Okay, so that's one of the next slides. We need all those things. So if I were to re-summarize it, we need air and compression. Air and compression kind of go together. It needs fresh air, but it needs to compress it. We need fuel, we need spark. Everybody remember that. It needs air and compression, fuel and spark. Or we can just say compression, fuel, and spark. It's probably more reasonable. Compression, fuel, and spark. Actually, to be honest on this one, I did a spark test. I'm going to leave that a little bit out of it because I'm going to show you how to do that. But for now, we're talking about the mechanical engine. So one of the first things I do is compression test. it had a misfire on cylinder number 4. So what I did is I checked cylinder number 2. I got about 175 psi. I checked cylinder number 4. It's a V8, right? It's a Tahoe. 2468. I checked 2, it was 175. 4 was zip. Literally. It was like 0 or almost 0. I actually have it on video. I don't remember the detail. It was very low. Should I put spark plugs in it? It doesn't have any compression. Like the problem's in the engine. So, the stupidest part was really nice family. I worked on one of their other cars. I did the diagnosis with them standing there. So like, I think I was like 20 minutes into the diagnosis and I was like, oh yeah, the engine's no good. The engine's got to come out. And they're like, what? We just put spark plugs and like a bunch of stuff. And he was saying it could be a problem with the computer. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't make compression on cylinder number 4. What? Well, we don't need to talk about all the external. It doesn't make compression on cylinder number 4. You could change everything in the vehicle and it's still not going to make compression on cylinder number 4. It's like, oh man, we just will. And I'm like, all right, well, I don't know if you want to fix it. Don't be emotionally attached to the car. Make sense? So like, don't be like, I really hope it's something cheap. When it's a customer's car, I don't care. And it's not that I want it to be something, I just don't. I'm just telling you. They do that to doctors, right? They take doctors in and they do weird stuff with human bodies so that they become emotionally detached. You will never be good at diagnosing if you're hoping for the cheap thing. You just got to be like very objective and just be like, I don't care what's wrong. Let's just test this, test this, test this. So quickly, I'm like, no, we need to check the compression. Oh, it failed. I wasn't like, I don't want to check that because I'm afraid it could be that, just boom, done. And they're like, whatever. All right, so that's all I'm going to tell you for right now. So I'm going to use this car a little bit later. If I do the compression test and it fails, what do I know? It doesn't make compression. It's in the engine. But that's it, though. I don't know what's wrong in there. I just know it's that. So stop putting spark plugs and stuff in there. All right, cool. So I did that pretty early on. The other thing is that's kind of fun. Sometimes the way it cranks can tell you something. So that cylinder has no compression on cylinder 4, right? So if I were to start the engine or if I were to just crank it over, and I'm gonna lie, the firing order, let's just say is 1, 2, 3. Let's make it a 4-cylinder for now. Let's just lie and say this compression goes 1, 2, 3, 4. If I crank it over with the starter, right, the starter has to fight compression. It slows down. It's like roar, and then cylinder 2, roar, and then cylinder 3, roar, and then cylinder 4, roar. So when you start the car, it should go like roar, 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 roar. Or you might say sha na 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 na. You can make the different sounds, but you notice there's like a rhythm. All right. If you go to crank it and it sounds like that rhythm is off, that could actually already give you a clue that one of the cylinders might not have good compression. So when it goes, you're like, what the heck is the ram? Why is it? It should be not ram. And then you're like, well, maybe it's got low compression. Cool. So it sounds crazy, but you can actually get a hint of whether or not it's an engine mechanical issue. Just listen to the crank. I had another guy with a Nissan call me. And usually if they ask if I'm Pablo, I already kind of know like, all right, this is one of the guys who got my name from one of the other laborers and the workers. And like, they're good guys, but I'm usually stepping into a mess. Like the only people who call me that are a lot of the people I do like work with where I'm at in the ranches, right? So this guy calls and says, Pablo. I'm like, yeah, you're mechanical? And I'm like, yeah, who are you? He's like, oh, I have a problem with my car. It's right now, it's down the road. I'm like, well, you're lucky I'm home. Like, yeah, what's up? So I go over there. It won't start. Go to crank it. Remember the noise it should make, right? Rah, 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 rah. It goes like this. Like no compression at all. You could hear no resistance. And I look and like, you can see the belts turning. So the starter's turning the engine. Why do you think the engine's making no compression? And it's an older Nissan. And I'm like, hey, amigo, you done the timing belt? He's like, no. I'm like, well, okay. So if the timing belt breaks or a timing chain breaks, the valves aren't going to open. So you're not going to have like one cylinder with no compression. You have all of them with no compression. So there was no It was just, I'm like, this is not going to be good. This one's going to be bad. And like for him, I was like, all right, just look, we'll pull this cover off the front right here. Boom, pull the plastic cover. And you could see the belts broke and all twisted up and wound up. And like, this is done, So now you hear that it's an older Nissan. It's looking pretty rough. What do you think the customer wanted to do about it? Junk it. Just do like, no, I'm done. Junk. Thank you very much. So like, I'm like, look, I spent like 15 minutes on this. You don't have to pay me nothing. Just get it on out of here. But at least they knew that was the right diagnosis. Make sense? So if I didn't go about it in the right way and I didn't notice the sound, like I didn't even check compression. Honestly, I could hear it. It was low. I just pulled the cover, boom, that's it. I'm like, whatever, just go. Like, I'm just out of here. I didn't charge you $1, not gonna even deal with it. Just go. But if I were to not have gone about it the right way, and he was already talking about, you want to get the bujías, the spark plugs and all that. Like, no, let me listen. Let me check it out. So if I were to not go about that the right way and I were to end up 2-3 hours in diagnosis, I wasn't gonna be able to just let him go with a freebie, right? I mean, if I'm there 15 minutes, I'm just gonna get it out of here. Cool. So some of that can give you a good clue. Pretty nice things. What do you know about a tune-up, right? Because this is what he was thinking. And this is what the common person thinks. My car doesn't run right. It needs a tune-up. Okay, that's how people think, because that's how it is. I mean, that's pretty common. Like, I agree, it is more common they need a tune-up. Do you know what a tune-up even really is? It's typically spark plug wires, distributor cap, rotor, old school stuff. Back in the day before that, they would do all those ignition parts and they'd tune up the carburetor a little bit. The carburetor could not cause one cylinder to misfire because it was one carburetor for all the cylinders. Now you have, if it's a V8, 8 injectors, 8 coils, 8 spark plugs, 1 ECM that signals all that stuff. So like, now the diagnosis is a little different. If the customer says it needs a tune-up, what you're really going to say is like, when the car doesn't run right, what we don't do is put a bunch of ignition parts and spark plugs and stuff on there. That's not what we do now. Okay. That's not what we do. That might've been what they asked me to do on the side of the road in that Nissan, but it's not what we do anymore. So now it needs to be diagnosed. Makes sense? So you could throw all those parts on there. You could tune it up, but if the timing belt's broken, it's not going to fix it. If you throw all the tune-up things on there, but the compression's low on cylinder 4, it's not going to fix it. Makes sense? So go away from that and just do the diagnosis. That's going to be our focus. Cool. All right. I think we're probably pretty good on the different cranking. Like, for example, that Nissan was a fast cranking sound from a no compression condition because the timing belt was broken. Makes sense? Uneven compression because cylinder number 4 is not making compression and the other 7 are. It'll sound uneven. Cool. And then, of course, if it sounds really bad and it's knocking and broken stuff, that's a little different. So let's talk about what a cylinder power balance is. These are going to be some of the tests. Most of them will be in part 2. If I do a power balance, ready? Here's what it is. Let's make it a 4-cylinder. The 4-cylinder is idling at, I'm going to use really nice round numbers for us. The 4-cylinder is idling at 1,000. Let's say it should be idling at 1,000 RPMs. Because that's normal. You compare it to another car and that's idling at 1,000. This customer car is idling at 750. Right? It's a 4-cylinder. Knowing those numbers, where do you think I'm going with this? All right, let's think about it like this. If it's a 4-cylinder and it should idle at 1,000 RPMs, each one of those 4 cylinders contributes an equal amount of RPM. How much? 250, 250, 250, 250. Exactly. The customer's is idling at 750. One's not working exactly. Which one? I don't know. So this is what I do. Ready? I don't know which 4, so I disable one of the cylinders. Does it make a difference? Yes. I reconnect it. It comes back up, right? So it's at 750. I disconnect this one. It drops to 500. It's barely running. I plug the coil back in. It picks back up to 750. Was that one working? Yes, I agree. Now, how I did that depends. On a coil unplugged car, I'll probably just disconnect the coil. On an older car, depends on how much fun I want to have. If it's spark plug wires with like a distributor, you could pull the spark plug wire right off the spark plug. That sucker is going to try to shock you so bad, you're going to find out. So if it's me and you're pulling them, I'm going to have you pull like that. But if it's just me, I don't know. I might, if it's got fuel injection, I might actually disconnect the injector. You know, however I can disable the cylinder, take away the spark or take away the fuel. If it's a more modern car, you know what I'll do? I'll just do it all through the scan tool. I'll just be like, disable cylinder 1, boop. I'll be like, oh yeah, I feel it. I can even look at the number, right? I don't look at the tachometer. I'll look at the engine RPM in the scan tool. And I'll be like, oh, it's 750. Disable it. Boom, drops to about 500. All right, that one's good. Turn cylinder 1 back on. Cylinder number 2. Disable it. 750. Plug it back in. Still 750. Disable it. That one's doing nothing, right? So we're testing, is the cylinder contributing? Is the cylinder giving us any extra RPM? So that's all the power balance is. It's extremely simple. Power down each cylinder, whether disconnecting an injector, a coil, or a spark plug, and you can use spark plug wires with a little grounding electrode so you don't get shocked, or you can just take it like a man. Get shocked. Pow, gives you superpower. That's how I lost my hair. Blew the hair right off my head. That's how I got this hairdo. It's true. Not really. It can diagnose whether a cylinder is firing or not. So if I have the pliers, all they're doing is disconnecting a spark plug, and I'm listening for a change, or I'm watching the change on the scan tool. So it can get down to the spark plug level, but at the first level, we need to know which cylinder is it. So in our example, wasn't it cylinder 2? We don't know what's wrong with cylinder 2 though, right? We just know the problems with cylinder 2. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, once we've just, and that's all with these, that's what all these words are. Okay, so if everybody kind of understands, like, that's what a power balance is. The example I've given many times is, let's say that you're a team of 4 lube techs in a shop, and together you guys do, let's say you do, I don't know, how many oil changes a day? We'll make it really easy numbers. 4 lube techs do 40 oil changes a day at full capacity. So you do 10 apiece, right? But then let's just say, let's get a volunteer. Anybody wants a volunteer? All right, you call in sick. You call in sick and 30 oil changes get done. And then you come back to work and it's back to 40. We know how much you did. One more volunteer. Jamonte, good. You call in sick and 40 oil changes still get done. And then you come back and 40 oil changes still get done. How many were you doing? It's kind of like that, right? It's the same thing. You're just determining how much the individual cylinder contributes, right? So like if overall the shop can't see how many you each do, they just know our lube techs do 40. It's kind of helpful to have somebody MIA for a day, and then you can see how much they actually did. That's what we do when we disable the cylinders. Now, let's say from there, and let me also explain, a newer car with a PCM, sometimes those are hard to tell because electronically through the PCM and through electronic throttle body, it'll artificially bump the RPM up and you will barely even notice if you disconnect. But usually if you disconnect and reconnect, you can be like, I can hear a difference. So just so you know, on the newer fuel injected cars that are a little more advanced with electronic throttle, it can be hard to do this test, FYI. The other cool thing is on the newer car, it's going to be running onboard diagnosis. So it's probably going to set a code for a misfire that's going to be specific to the cylinder. So if it's cylinder number 2, you probably have a code P0302, misfire cylinder 2. All right, so we don't do the power balance all that often anymore with the newer styles, all right, just so you all know. And you get a copy of this if you want it. I'm going to jump to the next one. So we talked about how we can do it. We talked about the old school ways we could do it. I can even show you this as one of the ways we do it on the scan tool, right? But before I get too detailed into that, I want to just make sure you understand one of the next steps is to determine whether disable the ignition or fuel. So how? Whichever is easier, basically. If it's a gasoline direct injection, though, you're not gonna be able to reach those injectors, so you're gonna probably do the coil. If it's an old school engine with big spark plug wires, I'd probably do the injector. If it's really new, you're gonna do it with this. You're literally gonna do it through the scan tool. And what's really cool is you can actually watch the RPM through the scan tool. So this RPM is what you think you're gonna watch, but like then you gotta be in the car and you're outside the car. So you might as well get the scan tool, drag it around the front. You could look at it, like with a universal scan tool. Makes sense. So if we're using this snap-on scan tool and we get it up to RPM and you look at this idle speed, what's the idle speed in this example? 701 RPM. Then you can disable them mechanically and you can watch that number change or not change. And the number will jump around a little bit. That's normal. Or sometimes what you can do is through the scan tool, just press disable 1, disable 2, disable 3, disable 4, right? So the test can vary a little bit. Mostly all you really need to know is how to interpret the results. You'll figure out how to do the test. It's not hard. It'll usually walk you right through, right? And then the other thing is a lot of times you'll wait a little bit of time. You'll see how much it changes. And we also don't want to leave it disconnected too long. And the main concern with that is, let's say that you disable spark and it still sprays fuel. The engine's still running. Where's that fuel going? In the cylinder first, and then we're probably going to pump it out the exhaust, and all that fuel is going all over your catalytic converter, and your catalytic converter is not happy. That's one of the reasons that when we have a misfire, the light flashes. It's saying like, this is a catalyst damaging misfire. Every time your vehicle misfires and raw fuel goes into the cat, it's ruining the cat. Remember what I said about cats, don't you? All right, so if you have a misfire and it kills the cat, and you put a cat in it and you don't fix the misfire, the next cat's going to be also murdered. It's the way it is, right? So we got to be a little careful with that. And then you write your numbers down, and it's not really that super difficult. And the other thing is, like, let's say after you do your power balance, we all agree it was cylinder 2, right? Now what? I don't know. I would probably try to take a look at the spark plugs. And I've actually got a little link right here that I think will pull up okay. Yeah, this is safe. I trust it. So here's a cool little reader diagram, right? So there's normal with red coating. Coloration is from use of additives and unleaded fuel. I was going to say I have never seen normal with red, so that's kind of interesting. Fuel, that's wet. So fuel fouled, which means like not all the fuel got burnt. Maybe it's too rich. I also see if the spark doesn't occur, it leaves the fuel in there and it ends up kind of wet, right? So that would have been a clue. Detonation's damaged, and detonation's a little, it would take too much time to explain. That's, there's more than likely multiple flame fronts in the cylinder. It's probably hot. Worn out is interesting. Worn out is not a defect. Worn out just means that gap gets bigger and bigger over time, because actually with all that firing, we start to wear away some of the electrode, the grounding in the center electrode, and this gap gets bigger, and those won't fire very efficiently. And when they get so far gap, they won't even fire at all. And the bigger that gap is, it's actually harder and harder on the coil. So like if we're doing this test and you see that the gap is big, it's like, hey, you need spark plugs like as a maintenance. Back in the day, spark plugs used to be maybe 24,000 miles, 36,000 miles, 60. Now they're like 100,000 plus. So we're not doing spark plugs that often. If they're like a iridium coated, we'll do more of that in ignition. Glazing's interesting. I would have to say probably too hot of a spark plug. Carbon fouled's interesting. Let's say that we had carbon. It's not getting hot enough. It's almost like if you have a fireplace and you never get it that hot, it tends to like soot up the glass. You guys wouldn't know, California people, but if you go someplace cold, there's this thing called a fireplace. If it's not that hot, like if you don't get the wood hot enough, it'll like fog the glass with dark. It'll be dark looking. get it hotter, it'll burn that off. We'll skip a little bit. You can see a few more. Here's an oil fouled. So that one's oil consumption, right? So if we do the power balance, and then we know it's cylinder 2, and I pull the spark plugs out, cylinder number 2 spark plug is going to give me a clue as to what's up. See what I'm saying? So we do the power balance at cylinder number 2, I pull it out, and cylinder 2 is, let's say, oil fouled. Do I pretty much know what's up? Why is it so oily? It's got oil consumption. Something is wrong with cylinder 2 internally. Makes sense? I don't know exactly what, but I'm on a direction. I'm not lost in the weeds. Like, I think it's the radiator and it could be the other. You see what I'm saying? So we're going through a sequence, right? And you guys can have access to this, but without delay, we'll jump back where we're supposed to be here. We're going to pull the spark plugs and line them up, right? And then we can really take a look at them. We could do all the maintenance like gapping spark plugs and check the gaps and things, but just honestly, if a car comes in for a misfire, it's very unlikely that it's a gapping problem for a couple reasons. One, they don't need to be gapped all the time. So if they were gapped when they were put in right, they didn't like lose their gap. And if they did, it's because they're worn. Or if the spark plugs were just put in and the technician's not careful and accidentally bends the electrode in, it'll short it out and that won't fire. So like, go at this while you're looking the gap, but don't bust this out, because this is, we don't gap modern spark plugs. Those are iridium laser coated fancy spark plugs. If you try to gap them, you actually scrape the coating off of the spark plug, and it's no longer the $15 iridium. You just made it a basic champion. That's $2. So don't do that. Just don't touch that. Inspect it, but don't touch that. Cool. So like if you look at this one, maybe this one is oil fouled or, you know, carbon fouled or something. Makes sense? So we're getting a good clue. Makes sense? If you get in there like what I did with the Ford Explorer and I saw it looked like it was kind of steam clean, but it had shiny deposits on it. What was the clue on that one? Coolant. So I'm thinking like, let me pursue this, right? So we're really kind of like detectives in a way. And I'm like, I think this is gonna be coolant. Let me go ahead and pressure test it. And boom, there's the coolant and the diagnosis is done in half an hour. And I'm billing an hour because I still got to put it back together. And the customer's happy. I mean, he's not really that happy because the engine needs to be done, but the customer's not unhappy with me because I didn't misdiagnose it. And that's what's good. So if this one was oil fouled, be like, hey, something's up with the engine. Then you might have to go to the customer and say, it's in the engine. I don't know what it is. You may need an engine, and it may be some of those numbers I was saying. It may be 6,000, 12,000, 15,000. I don't know. It depends on the engine. Do you want to proceed, or do you want to just pay me the diag time and you know it's in the engine, right? What do you want to do? Tell me what you want. Junk it. Get a new car. Forget it. And all you owe me is the 1 hour I got to diagnose this, and that's it. And I'm happy to take that 1 hour and not even get involved. What I don't want to do is put a bunch of stuff on it and then like be like, oh, I don't know, I think it might be the engine, and then you're like, well, give me my money back. And I'm like, well, but I did the work. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't do it right. I mean, like, you were wrong, and you're allowed to be wrong when you're minimum wage. You're allowed to forget. You got to do the ketchup and then the mustard. And if you accidentally do the mustard and then the ketchup and the customer's like, you screwed it up, you're like, all right, cool, well, I'll just get paid to make your burger again. Like, it's just different. You understand? So if you get to the level where you're like the professional doing the diagnosis, you're pretty much a doctor. And I would say like doctors aren't always that good at this either. But like, you're going to bill more money. So you're all probably trying to get more money for the same amount of time. That's kind of the goal. When you get older, you figure it out. Working is good, but you want to collect as much money for each hour that you can. That's kind of the goal. When you get to this point and you can do this type of good, clean diagnosis, you could bill good for it. And I'd say it's a great service to the public because you're not misdiagnosing and guessing and spending people's money putting spark plugs on an engine that's no good, right? So that's kind of where my mind is at. All right, so let's go through the 4-stroke cycle. This is a spark ignition. You guys know what that means? It's got a spark plug. Yeah, spark ignites the combustion. So like right here, these are not the 4 strokes. This is just what happens with the combustion. The spark occurs, it ignites the air and fuel, it starts to make flame right there. Flame burns, and when it burns, it expands the gas, right? It expands it. And you know what that does? Pushes down on the piston. So this is just the power stroke right here. Combustion's continuing, it's pushing the piston down. Combustion's ending, the piston's on its way down. And then by then we've burned up all the fuel and the air is now no longer oxygen. It's like inert exhaust gas. We got to get rid of it. This is spark ignition. This is different. This one, we have intake brings air in. So if I bring this back, this is air and fuel. This one brings in just air. And we compress it on this compression ignition to a much, much higher PSI, a much higher ratio. It's a higher number. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a fuel spray. And because this is a diesel and we're running such high compression, 22-to-1 or so, that's going to actually ignite it itself. There is no spark. But the combustion is occurring because the very, very, very high compression and the fuel is actually going to push the piston down. And other than that, it's the same. So what's really the difference? This one is controlled by the ignition, and this one is controlled by the compression. Ignition starts the fire, compression starts the fire. Other than that, that's pretty much it. And without making this too much on diesel, yes, diesels don't have spark plugs, but the main thing is they have much, much higher compression ratio, so high that they don't even need a spark plug at all. It's not because the diesel lights, it's actually harder to ignite the diesel. That's why these run higher compression. So if you understand that, now you have to understand the reason we have the compression in the first place. If you have no compression, you don't preheat the air and fuel, your spark plug's not going to do anything. It's just, you're going to be like, hey, here's some atmospheric air and here's a little fuel, and then like light the spark plug, and it's going to be like, tick, and this little like, spark, like a little lightning in there, right? There's an electrical arc and nothing's going to happen. And that right there is a misfire. So if you think about what the misfire really is, it could be because there was no spark, right? And it could be because it's only compressed air and spark, but there's no fuel. That would not make a flame front. Or it could be you have good spark and good fuel, but if you don't have the correct amount of compression, it's not going to fire. So this is just a visual on, now you all know we need a good spark, we need a good correct amount of fuel, and we need good compression / air. And if you have all that, the baby's going to fire. And if you don't, it ain't. And that's just the way it is. Cool. So we're mostly focused on compression, and this mostly just goes over like, when you increase temperature, it increases pressure. And when you increase pressure, it increases temperature. So the reason we need to compress it is we need to get that air and fuel nice and hot. So it's like ready, ready, ready to burn. It's kind of like the wildfires around here. You don't really have a lot of fires when it's cold. It's when everything's hot, dry, ready to burn. We need to get the compression up because that high pressure is going to result in a high temperature and everything is hot. And then all it takes is just a little spark, boom, and then it's burning. Right? So that's just the Charles law, which you could also apply to brakes or a number of things. All right, here's a fun one. Here you go. Here are the 4 strokes. If you knew these 4 strokes and you wanted to make a cool t-shirt, you could. We'll explain them the way I explain them first, and then we'll make a cool t-shirt version or a bumper sticker. All right, let's start with number 1, shall we? Intake. You know what happens on the intake stroke? It's like the breathe in, right? Breathe it in. But you got to notice we got a valve that's open right here. So this intake valve was pushed open, and the piston going down is going to pull that intake air in, right? That's how it's going to work. So to make the intake stroke, we had to do some things, just understand. Then when it gets, and it started at top dead center, when it gets to bottom dead center, it's going to turn right around and it's going to start going back up with the valves closed. That's how we know it's the compression stroke. So if we look at this one over here is going back up, it's got a valve open. This one over here is going up and both valves are closed. That's the compression stroke. Why do we need the compression? Higher pressure, higher temperature, get everything ready for the spark. So let's just say we screwed up and we accidentally opened one of these valves during the compression stroke and it bled all the compression off. What would we have? A misfire. It'd be missing a fire. That's right. Exactly. Or let's just say we didn't screw up, but the engine is screwed up. Like, let's just say the piston is really worn like old Bessie was. We're trying to make compression, but the compression is actually leaking past the piston going down here. You don't make enough compression, you can have a misfire. If you have a little bit low compression, it might still fire, but not with a lot of power. But if you have too low of compression, it just won't even fire at all. So all these things have to be in good condition to generate the proper compression so that we can, well, start the fire. And then when it gets to top dead center or thereabouts, the combustion is going to start with a spark. So we spark the spark plug, it builds the flame front, it pushes it down like this. That's this right here. That's the money right there. That's you like the sound of certain cars? When you hear the sound of a car, you're actually listening to the combustion. Is that wild? Like, I know you'd be thinking about the Mustang, but see, that's not my brand. So when you be listening to that Mustang, you're listening to that combustion in the cylinder of that Mustang going through straight pipes. Am I right? Probably, and some like little X pipe and nothing else. All right, but that is what you're hearing. You're hearing the actual combustion. It's kind of amazing. And then after the combustion, which that generated the force that got pushed down on the crank, which that's reciprocal and it becomes rotating motion, and the rotating motion turns your lame torque converter and automatic transmission. Oh, no. It turns your clutch in your manual transmission. No. It turns whatever it is that you got and ultimately turns your front wheels, your rear wheels, even better, or all your wheels. Make sense? So like this is the supply of power right here. Pushes down. Then after that, guess what? This is all spent, burnt up exhaust gas. So that means it can't be reburned. There's no oxygen. So we open up the exhaust valve, we go back up, we pump it out. So if you look at this, do you know what your engine really is? It's just an air pump. It sucks air in, it compresses it. We put a little fuel in there, we put a little zappy thing, and then light it on fire, and then breathe it all back out. So if we're having a misfire, you really have to understand, it could be the spark and it could be the fuel, right? We're going to talk about those. But for right now, we got to focus on the engine as a breathing machine, as an air pump. Did it suck the air in? Did it compress the air properly? Did it have a power stroke? No, that's why we're looking at it. It's a misfire. Did it exhaust the air properly? That's what the engine does. Just does that. That's it. It's pretty simple. If it's not breathing correctly, we can actually usually catch that on a vacuum reading with a vacuum gauge. That's one of your tests that we're going to do. If it's not making compression, we can catch that on a compression gauge, right? Cylinder number 4 of that Tahoe, no compression. I don't know what's wrong. I just know this engine air pumper machine is not pumping the right air. It's not something's up in there. I don't know. Something. You want to fix it or not? No, we're going to junk it. All right, good. Give me my hour. Or if it's somebody that I feel for, that I'm, the least of these types, with the guy with the old Nissan, I'm just like, just go. Just get it out of it. It's junk. The timing belt's broken. We're not going to fix it. Probably the timing belt broke, but probably the timing belt broke and probably the valves and the pistons hit. It probably had more than just a broken timing belt, which is why I kind of said, like, you don't want to fix this, man. Just let this one go. Makes sense? So if you think of this, you'll be able to do pretty good diagnosis. If you go one after the other here, intake, you notice the camshaft has to open the valve. Air comes in. Air comes in for two reasons, really. Out here, there's what's called atmospheric air pressure. at sea level, that's 14.7 pounds of air that's above us. So at above sea level, it'll be less, and below sea level, it'll be more. So that air is kind of trying to be pushed in. But what's also happening is when your piston is going down, because it's sealed really nicely, this piston going down is leaving like a vacuum. It's leaving a space, right? The piston went down, it's trying to pull the air with it. So what's interesting is if you don't have a good sealing engine, yes, it won't make compression, I agree, but it also won't make the correct amount of vacuum. So there was a while ago, I'll make it the shorter version of the story, that a guy was trying to diagnose a misfire, and a more senior guy to me who knew the old school ways, like the old ways, just quickly vacuumed. Actually, no, it wasn't a misfire. It was a map sensor code. They had a map sensor code, and he's thinking like, yeah, I put a map sensor in, it didn't fix it, and came over with a vacuum gauge, plugged it in, and ran the engine. A healthy engine should be like 21 inches of mercury. This thing was like 9. So he's like, yeah, your engine's not making enough vacuum. It's like, yeah, but that's not the, it's got a map sensor code. Map sensor is manifold absolute pressure. It measures vacuum. It's giving a code because the reading is out of spec. The reading is out of spec because the engine didn't make correct vacuum as verified by a vacuum gauge. Make sense? So the parts cannon, totally miss. Why did it not make good vacuum? Because the piston rings were not sealing correctly. They don't make good compression when they're not sealing, but they also don't make good vacuum. And you could tell what clued him off was the engine wasn't really running that good. It was like barely running. The newer tech thought it was because the map sensor was bad. The older tech's like, no, it's setting a map sensor code because the engine itself is no good, right? Common theme. Cool, so the piston's coming down, pulls the air, and we'll say the fuel, and that depends on the type exactly. We'll go over fuel. Go ahead. Okay, I'll bite on that. Let's say on the intake stroke, we're expecting it to pull in a certain amount of air, right? If you zoom out on the engine, the intake stroke is pulling air in, but where'd the air come from? The air comes from what's called the intake manifold. The intake manifold should house the amount of air it needs, like in the plenum. From there, your throttle either opens or doesn't open. So let's just say we're looking at really this stroke right here. The leaking intake manifold won't hurt this because it can still suck the air in. But if we had a problem with the intake manifold gasket, you might have air getting sucked in at the gasket rather than going through the throttle, because the throttle controls it. If it doesn't go through the throttle, that means the mass airflow sensor didn't read it, right? So like, I know where you're thinking. For now, we focus on this part. When we get later, when we start looking at like mass airflow sensor, you can't understand it unless you understand this. This generates the vacuum to suck the air in. Every molecule of air it sucks in needs to be measured so we can't have leaks, right? Pulls it down in. It's on the way down. This is port fuel injector. We'll go all into detail on fuel, okay? You guys should be pretty good on the intake. All right, how about compression? We got this one. Intake valve closes. Exhaust valve should still be closed. We just come up. At this point, we may generate 200 PSI, if it's a 10-to-1 ratio. That's going to really test out our rings, right? If our rings aren't sealing down here, compression is going to leak by. We're going to get a low number. If our exhaust valve is bent, air is going to leak out. We're going to get a low number. If our intake valve is held open a little bit by a bad valve adjustment, air is going to leak out. We're going to get a bad number. If our valves are burnt, bent, cracked, not seating, held open, all that stuff, you understand, we're going to get a bad number. It should make 200 PSI or maybe whatever the spec is. I don't usually see anything below 135 for a spec. If you get 17 PSI, that's not going to be enough to fire. Make sense? That's literally what we're measuring when we do the compression test. Cool? Now, everything should be happening with the intake and the exhaust valve, right? But remember that one that had a broken timing belt? The timing belt's job is to time this cam. So if the timing belt's broken, this cam intake cam is not going to open the valve on time. That one didn't make compression because the timing belt was broken, and these valves were just chilling. They're just hanging out, hanging around like that. Yeah, I know all this stuff, right? Compression, mostly we're about leaks. What if we had a worn cylinder like Bessie? We're going to lose compression down here. What if the technician was running the air ratchet and the screw fell out of the air ratchet and bounced into the engine, went down the intake, went down in the cylinder, and was chilling on top of this piston. And when it came up once, it got wedged and popped the hole in that piston. What are we going to have? You know, I'm speaking from experience, right? So after the big job, the intake reseal or whatever, all of a sudden this engine's got a misfire. We measure compression on that cylinder and it's got 0. End up sending a camera down in there. The screw actually popped the hole in the piston. It broke the piston. You have compression loss through a hole in the piston, right? So like all this is going to result in low compression. So when the Tahoe has low compression, I didn't say, oh, it's your rings, it's your valves, it's a hole in the piston. I didn't say that. What I said was, it's in there. I don't know what. You want to pay more money? Yes or no? And that's it. And if it's no, like, we're good. I'll take the little diag. You know it's the engine, but that's all I could tell you. I don't know. Cool. So mostly the compression is where we focus. And then when we talk, then of course, you know, the exhaust stroke is pretty simple. We just open the exhaust valve, push it out. Couple terms were in there: top dead center, bottom dead center. Did you catch that? When the piston's all the way at the top, that's top dead center TDC. When the piston's all the way at the bottom, that's bottom dead center BDC. The difference between BDC and TDC is how far it strokes. So if you hear the bore and stroke, the bore is the size of the cylinder, like round, and the stroke is how far. So if you got a stroker 383, that means you're stroking further like this, which means you're going to pull more volume of air. That's your displacement. Cool. So just talking a little about engines there. Your compression ratio is different. That's how much, basically, the volume of this whole cylinder is going to be squeezed into the volume of just your head, like your combustion chamber. That's a ratio, right? So in this case, 8-1, that's pretty low. You got 8, whatever, cubic inches, cc's, milliliters, whatever volume you want to use. 8 imaginary units are going to be squeezed into 1. That's your ratio. More modern engines would be 9, 10-1, 10.5-1. I've heard like 11 something. Race car stuff might be 13. That's going to sound good. Higher compression, harder on the parts, but it is more efficient. And efficiency, right? So when you hear these, so when you say how much compression should it have, it depends on the ratio. That's why I gave you numbers. 135 maybe, 200 maybe, it kind of depends. But all the cylinders should be pretty similar though. You don't have 8-1 compression on one cylinder and 10 on another. They're all going to be designed the same. All right, now this one, you have to understand what we already covered to understand this, right? So hopefully you're good. You're still hanging with me. This one, I forgot this day. All right, what happens at the top of compression? Spark. So in our minds, we think, yeah, when it gets to TDC of compression, let's spark the spark plug. What's that going to do? Fire, flame. Audio on. Test, test. Yep, that's good. All right. So you're hearing all these cool sounds because it at top dead center does the whole spark thing. But in reality, you got to understand this thing is turning, I don't know, let's say 2,500 RPMs. It's moving so fast that if you spark at top dead center, this piston's already like halfway down by the time the flame front catches up. See what I'm saying? So when we're talking about cam timing, that's when the valves open and close. But I'm going to introduce a new type of timing. This is ignition timing. This is when the spark occurs. I just want to check one thing. No, I think this is still good. Yeah, my screen definitely totally forgot. I think we're still good. So this is about when the spark occurs. So if I were to say at TDC, that would be 0 degrees. 0 degrees, B TDC is before. And 0 degrees sounds good, except it's just moving too fast, especially at like higher RPM. All right. So let's just say at idle, maybe we'll make idle 1,000 RPMs. It's probably a little high, maybe like 800, but let's say 1,000. We probably want that spark to occur, how about like 10 degrees before top dead center. So the piston's still coming up. It's still on its way up. We spark the spark plug. It sounds like, doesn't it sound like it would try to push it back down, like it hurt it? Well, it could. And that's why like the exact fine-tuned timing of the ignition timing is kind of sketchy. But it's computer controlled on a new car. So if it's coming up and we spark it at 10, by the time the piston's all the way up at TDC, the flame front's actually starting to build the most pressure. They get a really powerful stroke down. It'll get a really good power stroke. This is the visual to me. If I'm riding a bicycle, right, and I'm going kind of slow, my brain's already told my foot to start pushing down on the pedal when it's on the way up, right? It's on the way up, but I'm already like, yeah, start pushing down. By the time I send the signal, I'm pushing right after it gets to TDC. I'll get like a good push. Let's just say my brain's lagging a little, which has been known to do. I'm bringing it up and I'm like, all right, I'm at TDC. Now I should start pushing down. By the time I'm actually pushing, it's already halfway down. Like I don't get a very good push, right? Do you think I'm going to have a lot of power if I'm a day late and $1 short? No. So in reality, we want the timing to be like very precise. And if you look at the manufacturers, it's kind of interesting. They usually want it to be like kind of precise. Because this is the negative, right? Let's say we think 10 degrees, but let's say 10 degrees ends up a little too early. You're on the way up and you're like, yeah, fire the spark plug. And you actually start pushing down while it's still on the way up. Like you got all this weight of the crankshaft trying to push it up and you try to push it down. You're just going to mash those rod bearings. Those bearings can get messed up. FYI, that's what a bad tune can do. So if you have somebody adjust your timing, like on a tune trying to make good power, and they advance the timing too much, it can actually really trash those bearings. So from the manufacturer, they're like, you know what? Maybe don't do 12 degrees. Let's just do 10. 10 will be safe. 10 might not get you the maximum power, but like at least it's not going to mash the bearings, blow the engine up. Make sense? So if you want to be a tuner, you're going to be like, oh, they say 10, I think I can get 11. You know, that's big part of how they take the factory car and they tune it and they get like 20, 30 horsepower out of it. They start advancing the timing a little bit. So now the piston's coming up and they're like not 10 degrees, but 11. And 11's perfect and it hits it just right. And you get a really clean stroke on the power stroke. You might gain some horsepower out of there. That's what they do. However, it's a little risky, which is why the manufacturer doesn't do it, because under warranty, they don't want to pay for blown up engines. And the tuners are like, yeah, sign here, voiding all your warranties. Like, good luck, buddy. It'll be all right. Let me know how you do. You know, mention my name if the tune's good, but if it's bad, like, forget we ever talked. All right, so at 2,500 though, now you're pedaling your bike really fast. You know in your brain you got to start even earlier, right? Because now your pedals are going super fast. So like at 2,500 RPMs, how many degrees you want to fire early? How many degrees before top dead center? How about we do 20, right? So this number is going to change on the fly, on demand, based on RPM, based on load, based on some other things. So if we're coming up and we're like, hey, I'm going really fast, let's start 20 degrees before top dead center, boom, that'll actually still get you the maximum amount of power. So when we talk about ignition timing, that's what ignition timing is. Way back when we were talking about knocking, it was saying, hey, the engine knock could be spark knock. Yeah, if your timing is too early, you're going to hear some of that. That's also when you may run into some of the detonation, and you can run into all sorts of stuff. So luckily now the computer does this. If the computer, however, is monitoring this, it monitors it with a knock sensor. So as a tuner, we would take advantage of that. We would adjust the timing, and then we'd watch the knock sensor and see if the knock sensor picked up any activity. Be like, uh-oh, I gave it 12 degrees and I saw a little knock sensor change. Give it 11 and be like, all right, no knock sensor, cool, 11's the number. The knock sensor is a microphone. It listens for knock. So let's just say we have an engine that's got, I don't know, like messed up timing, or we advanced the timing too much, or maybe there's even damage in the engine where it's making the engine knock. The knock sensor will pick that up, and you might actually get codes for a knock sensor. And you might even go as far as to replace a knock sensor. And the problem is not the knock sensor, it's the knock, which could be timing, could be carbon, could be a bearing. See what I'm saying? So like, again, it comes back to the base engine. All right, so a few tests we could do that I think you'll find not that complicated. And then we'll be really set up for the part 2. Thing's definitely mad at me. All right, the vacuum test. Remember the vacuum test I told you? We had the engine with the vacuum, the map sensor code. This little vacuum gauge right here, all we're literally going to do, and I got a nice video on how to, we're going to find a vacuum source on the engine, and we're going to plug this one in there. And that's it. And it's going to give us a reading. We'll see what the reading is. Like I was telling you, on a healthy engine, maybe 21 inches of mercury. So that's just point at the 21 number. Could be 22, could be 19, could be 20. If it's 12, that's not good. There's something wrong with the breathing of that engine. So the vacuum gauge is mostly to evaluate how well the engine's breathing. You go to the doctor, they put the stethoscope in, they listen to your breathing, right? That's kind of what we're doing here. We're not listening to it, but we're actually seeing, like, how's this engine breathing? If it's got low compression, it's going to have lower vacuum. Lower meaning closer to 0, right? So the vacuum is a negative number. In fact, if we were to look on this vacuum gauge, what's really cool, it's at 0 right now. The vacuum numbers are over here on the left in red. The positive is over here on the right. Does anybody know if we were to hook this up to an engine and it were to show positive numbers, there's a term for that. You know what it is? It's not vacuum. It might have to do with a turbocharger or a supercharger. That'd be boost. Yeah. PSI is boost. So like when you have a forced induction engine, you don't actually make vacuum anymore. You boost it. So that's all positive. It's like your engine, you thinking, oh, I got 21 inches of mercury. Now, if you go wide open throttle on your naturally aspirated, you're probably gonna be around 0 because it's going to suck as much air as it can. 0 on the gauge is technically 14.7 atmospheric, all right? So it gets a little weird. But if your engine's breathing as good as it possibly can and you're wide open throttle and everything is working perfect, you could get almost atmospheric pressure inside your cylinder. That's going to read 0 and you're like, everything's good. Then you go with a forced induction supercharger, turbocharger, and they're like, take more, yeah. And then you're like, oh, 10 PSI. And you're like, oh, I really like this. 10 PSI means you got more air compressed in the cylinder, which means you could double your fuel and therefore double your power. Because after all, power actually only comes from fuel, so you know. It's the gasoline molecules, or the E85, if you will, or your ethanol, corn, alcohol, stuff like that, corn-fed, bottle-fed, all that. It's actually those chemical bonds in the fuel breaking apart that gives us energy. The problem is you can't just overfuel it, right? So if you can add extra air, you can therefore add extra fuel to keep it in a certain ratio, you can get more power. All right, so without going real crazy, the normal engine is going to make vacuum. So we're going to mostly focus on vacuum. If you're making good vacuum, it's breathing well. If you're not making good vacuum, that means you're going to be like closer to zero. It's not going low enough. So that's what's kind of weird. Vacuum is a negative pressure, but we think of it as higher because it's a higher number. 10 inches of mercury is some amount of suction. That's probably not enough to suck up the milk, shake it in and out, though. You need like 20 inches of mercury to draw it up the 20-inch straw. See what I'm saying? So the higher the number, it's actually technically the lower the pressure because it's measured in vacuum. It's kind of weird. All right, so we could go ahead and put that on there. And these are some of the numbers. 17 to 21 would be typical. That'd be healthy. This number is going to vary depending on your elevation and whatnot. But go ahead.
Are we testing this with
engine running?
With fuel, or are we disabling the fuel?
No, it's going to be running. Yeah, so it's like I'll show you right here on this one. We are literally going to connect this vacuum gauge, and we're going to start the engine. And then we're going to see what it reads. And so I don't speak in kilopascals. I speak in freedom units, which is equivalent to 15, 16. That's only 17 inches of mercury. So that'd be like minimally good. That'd be all right. Not great. It'd be okay. So literally while it's running, I'm going to watch this needle and see what number it points to. 17 inches of mercury. I'd be like, all right, yeah, that's a pass, but barely. Or the needle might bounce. So we're not just looking at the number, we're also looking at what's the needle doing. So like if the needle's bouncing, that's actually going to tell me like it's breathing good and it's not breathing good. It's good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. It's kind of something like something's going on there. If I see the needle bouncing, I'm already sketched out about the valves, right? So like if it's a vacuum leak, it wouldn't bounce, it'd be steady low. If it's low compression, it's going to be steady low. If it's bouncing, you got an intake valve that's either opening or not opening or sticking, like it's something mechanically, something's going on with the valve train at that point, right? So I could know that just in seconds. Boom, like hey, something's up with your valve train here, your needle's bouncing. Or if the needle's steady, that's good. But if the needle's steady and low, that's bad. And then I might be like, well, it seems like it could be like low compression or a vacuum leak. Cool. So we'll jump right back here. Again, the amount of vacuum the engine creates relies on engine condition, but also the condition of the valves. The ignition timing is mostly out because we're mostly focused on newer cars and that's all computer controlled. So like computers don't really make mistakes with that. We used to when we used to have to set it with a distributor though. Week 3. Exactly. I made the video last time because it used to be so simple. Honestly, you just be like, oh, the intake manifold is here. I connect it to there. But like on a newer engine, especially something that has really aggressive variable valve timing or turbocharger or like Atkinson cycles become really common, especially in Toyotas. They don't make steady vacuum. So what's crazy is they run an engine-driven vacuum pump. So if you connect to a typical spot, you'll be like, wow, this thing makes like 25 inches of mercury all the time. It's amazing. And I'll be like, hit the throttle. You'd be like, vroom, and it doesn't even drop a millimeter. And I'm like, no way. Oh, you're connected to the vacuum pump. Of course, the vacuum pump's going to make amazing vacuum. So you need to know, don't connect there, connect over here. It used to be simple, but now they got all sorts of stuff going on. So I made a whole video on what to look for and where to find it, and you'll be fine. We used to mostly just pull it off the brake booster because the brake booster is right there. But now the brake booster is a lot of times powered by a vacuum pump. So we got to find the actual intake manifold vacuum. And we'll be there. It's a really easy test. I swear. It is super easy. All right. Then we're also going to do another test with like a throttle snap. So we're going to boom, and then we should be able to see like how low did it go and how high did it go. So at wide open throttle, it should go to near 0. And then when we snap the throttle closed, it should actually get to an even higher number. So see, we got almost 21 inches of mercury out of that snap test. Cool. And to be thorough, we also want to do the vacuum test around like 2,500. So the reason that we do that is, I mean, it's kind of like with us, you know, everything's good with your heart and your lungs and stuff until they're like, all right, run, jog in place. And then you're like, so you're going to bring it up to 2,500. And then we're gonna be like, yeah, let's test you now. And they'll be like, wait a minute, we thought it was good, but like at 2,500, this engine's cooked, you know, or this type of thing. So what I could tell you is when we do this test, this is your cheat sheet. If I look at this, let's look at a bouncing one. All right, if I look at this, the needle's normal at idle, but as we bump up the engine speed to 2,500, it starts to fluctuate. Fluctuates bouncing. I call it bouncing, they call it fluctuating. So here it was steady, and then at 2,500, it's like this. Keep in mind, the job of the valve springs is to pull the valve closed, and when it's at idle, it's pretty easy. But when it's at high RPM, the valve's like, get back up here. The valve spring's like, get back up here, get back. I'm running, it's getting away from me a little bit. And next thing you know, your valve's not snapping closed all the way because your valve spring's weak and you get the bounce in there. So like that one's real common on ASE A1, and it's somewhat common on ASE A8, this concept here. Steady, but it bounces at high RPMs. I'd be all over a valve spring. So this is a cheat sheet. You're all going to get a copy of the cheat sheet. So when we do the test on the lab cars, probably they're going to pass, but some of those cars are pretty rough. So I would not be shocked if some of them fail. If you have one that's misfiring and you do the vacuum test and it does some of these types of things like a bouncing needle, it's pretty good indication that it's a mechanical engine problem. You see, so this is a good, it gives you a good clue. Here's a second cheat sheet. We got a couple versions. This is actually one of my favorite one back here. This one slowly drops from normal as the engine speed is increased. It's almost like, you know, it was normal and then it drops off. And the more you increase it, the more it drops off. That could actually be like a restricted exhaust, like a clogged cat. These can be somewhat effective at diagnosing clogged cat too. So we'll do some of these types of tests. This is like one of the, I'd say probably the first thing would be the power balance. And then maybe the next thing could be a vacuum test. And then maybe after that, I might go to compression. Kind of depends on what my initial readings are though. All right, but now you want to see a really cool way we could do it? What if, all right, we're going to do high tech now. What if rather than doing the basic gauge like so, instead we use a transducer and an oscilloscope. And what we could actually do is hook it up in the same way. We're going to hook it up to vacuum, but then it's going to change over to electronic and it's going to display it on screen. And you can not only see what the vacuum was like in the instant, you can see what it does over time. All right. So this will trip you out a little bit, but if we use a picoscope or an oscilloscope of any sort, it's the same thing as using the gauge, but it graphs it for us, right? So like if your vacuum was dead steady at 21, it would just be a flat line, but it's usually not. This one is definitely moving, and some of this could be good, but I don't know. This dip right here might be a little bit concerning. So I might actually have to compare that to a known good to totally be able to interpret it. But because we're talking about a vacuum test, no, it could be the gauge. That's my go-to. I have several of those. But if we're trying to do really advanced diagnosis or like be able to give a file to an engineer at some corporate headquarters or something, you can't send them a gauge. You could, however, graph this and get an exact detailed line of exactly what the engine did and email it to someone in Japan or Detroit or wherever. If it's the Korean car companies, they're mostly based in Irvine. I've had to send them things before. So this makes it kind of nice. But to do that, yeah, we got to get out the picoscope and and a pressure transducer. The pressure transducer just takes pressure and makes it into voltage, and then this graphs it. So it's pretty cool. And you can do the snap throttle test as well. And then over here, there'd be numbers. So like, how high did it go? Maybe it got to 21 on the snap throttle. These types of things. You interpret it the same. Here's a steady. Hold it steady right here. The red, by the way, that is just something that we might pull off of like a crankshaft position. So that way we can tell this engine is a 4-cylinder. You know how I know? Because this was here, and then over here means it turned one time, and it did, actually, this is a V8. 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be a 4 at 8. It's hard to say. But in one revolution, you had 4 distinct pulses. I'd say that's a 4-cylinder. Cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4. That's kind of fibbing, because normally an engine is not 1, 2, 3, 4 firing order. So let's say it was cylinder 1, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, cylinder 2. That would be more typical. But like if you really want to get in depth, you can narrow down to exactly what cylinder is making what amount of vacuum. So remember the Tahoe, I said cylinder 4 had no compression, right? If I were to oscilloscope this, and this was cylinder number 4, this reading would be low on vacuum when cylinder number 4 is on the vacuum stroke, right? Or on the intake stroke. So like you could kind of geek out on this if you want. But maybe for now we'll keep it simple and we'll just use the gauge, shall we? Okay. And I think with that, we're probably where we should be. How'd you guys feel? Okay. You got any mechanical questions, or you feel like decent-ish? All right, well, let me make sure I tell you what all your assignments are going to be. So you're ready to do